Good afternoon. The Memphis and Shelby County Board of Adjustment is hereby called to order for its regularly scheduled meeting of May 26, 2000. My name is Tim Wright. I'm chairman of the board. Mr. Josh Whitehead serves as secretary of the board. Mr. Whitehead manages the roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, but I think you failed the first instruction. Okay, there we go. There we go. For the edification of all who are listening, Mr. Chairman, just call the meeting into order, and I'm doing the attendance. Ms. Baker.
Here.
Mr. Claybrook. Here. Mr. Jackson.
Here.
Mr. Malazri.
Here.
And Mr. Chairman.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. The Memphis and Shelby County Board of Adjustment is the oldest appointed governmental body in Memphis and Shelby County. We were established in 1925. The board hears appeals from the administration of the zoning ordinance, requests for variances from the zoning ordinance, and other requests as articulated by local zoning laws adopted pursuant to the enabling legislation. The 8 members of the board are appointed, 4 by the mayor of Memphis and 4 by the mayor of Shelby County, with confirmation by the Memphis City Council or Shelby County Board of Commissioners. We serve without remuneration. At this time, I would like to swear in the staff. You may remain seated. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, thank you. May I get a motion to approve the minutes from last month's meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Mr. Secretary, please provide us a secretary's report, if there is one this month, and then explain the procedure for today's meeting.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, our secretary's report. I think this is going to be our last telephonic meeting. We're going to follow the CDC, and the city, and the county guidelines, and I'm getting a note from Mr. Zena. He says make sure this will be our last telephonic meeting. The next Board of Adjustment meeting on the 4th Wednesday of June will be held downstairs in the large council chambers with all applicants and people testifying in support and in opposition present. And one note on this final, we hope, knock on wood, telephonic meeting. If you've called in from a Zoom account with an alias, just be sure there's a way that you can retype your name so we know who you are. That'll help our team of experts who are organizing our virtual attendees, depending on which case they've signed up to speak on. As far as our procedure, Mr. Chairman, it'll be as follows. I'll introduce each case as listed on the agenda. Copies of the agenda are found on our website, the Board of Adjustments website. If you do a search engine for Memphis and Shelby County Board of Adjustment, go to most recent agenda, click on that, and you'll find this agenda, or on our YouTube website, which we are streaming live on, and that's youtube.com/C as in channel, /Division of Planning and Development. If you go through, we will be going through the staff reports for each that are on which we'll have public hearings, and those staff reports are clickable from the agenda. Also, we will be streaming our PowerPoints that are largely mirror those staff reports on our YouTube page. Staff will first give its presentation. After that, the applicant will present his or her case. Following the applicant's presentation, those in support of the application will be given an opportunity to speak, followed by those in opposition. All parties who wish to provide testimony will be sworn in by the chairman. At the conclusion of the applicant and supporters, and then following that, the opposition, the applicant will be given a 2-minute rebuttal period. Before that 2-minute rebuttal period, each side has 10 minutes. The chairman can allot additional time to both sides, provided both sides get an equal amount of time. If the applicant or any speaker would like to be heard after the conclusion of those periods of time, 10, 10 plus 2, or if any board member wishes to hear additional testimony, a 2/3 vote is required to reopen the public hearing. And at that point, if it's reopened, we will hear from both sides with an additional amount of time for each side. All motions by this board will be in the affirmative. The private acts governing this board require the affirmative vote of at least 5 members to approve an application. So although that may be harrowing at this point because we have 5 members present, we do anticipate all 8 being here shortly. The board may also to hold an application to not exceed 90 days with the consent of the applicant or 30 days without the consent of the applicant. All section numbers that we refer to come from the Memphis and Shelby County Unified Development Code that was adopted in 2010. I will introduce the entire UDC to make it part of today's record, thus dispensing with the reading of individual sections. This body is vested with the power to act on the cases before it under the provisions of Chapter 922 of the UDC. Mr. Chairman, I submit that all cases have been filed in proper order, all applicants have been notified of this hearing, and all notice requirements have been fulfilled as required by the code.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. At this point, the board will establish a consent agenda. To establish the consent agenda, the Secretary will call out each eligible case. If any member of the staff or board member objects to a case being placed on the consent agenda, he or she should do so by a show of hands when the Secretary reads that case. Once the consent agenda is established, the board will vote on all cases placed on the consent agenda as a whole and will not hold individual public hearings on those cases. Mr. Secretary, which items on our agenda today are eligible to be placed on the consent agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And since we're present, if any member of the board wants one of these cases heard, just raise their hand. We know which cases other parties have requested public hearings. So our consent calendar begins with agenda item number 4. That's docket BOA 2021-45, located at 1535 Winchester, which is on the south side of Winchester, just east of I-55. The applicant is Stone Galleria. The use district is the CMU3, Commercial Mixed Use District, and the request is a use variance from 252 of the code to allow a stone fabrication and warehouse facility. Agenda item number 5 is docket BOA 2021-46, located at 386 and 390 South Main. The applicant is 18 Main, LLC, represented by John Halford. The use district is the South Main District in a historic overlay, and the request is a variance from paragraph 722E2 to allow multifamily development exceeding the maximum dwellings per acre allowed in that zoning district. Agenda item number 7 is docket BOA 2021-48, located at 6797 Messick. The applicant is Walter Wills III, represented by David Baker. The use district is the R15 Single Family District, and the request is a use variance from 252 to allow a real estate office in the old Kirby House. Agenda item number 8 is docket BOA 2021-49, located at 4009 Old Getwell. The applicant is Waste Management, Inc., represented by Nick Berner and Jim Wilson. The use district is the EMP Employment District, and the request is a use variance from 252 to allow the expansion of a waste transfer station. Agenda item number 9, docket BOA 2021-50, located at 646 East. The applicants are Frankie Brooks and Cesar Martinez, represented by Mike Davis. The use district, again, is the EMP Employment District, and the request are variances from 252, 310-2B, 453B, 455G, related to an existing warehouse with a proposed, 2 proposed dwelling units and a parking reduction. Period. That is the end of the consent agenda.
Okay. Thank you. May I get a motion to approve the consent agenda as established by the Secretary, which would be agenda items number 4, 5, 7, 8, and 9 as conditioned by staff?
So move.
Second. All right. I would like to remind the board that by voting on the consent agenda, he or she affirms that he or she has read the staff report and is in full agreement with the conditions. Mr. Secretary, may I get a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Claybrook?
Yes.
Mr. Malazri?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Ms. Baker?
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
That's 5 ayes.
All right. Well, if you are here then, or were joining us for cases 4, 5, 7, 8, or 9, you've been approved as conditioned by staff. and you can either continue to listen or go ahead and sign off. Thank you all for joining us. Mr. Secretary, with that, could you please call the first case on our regular agenda?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. That brings us to item number 1, which is docket BOA 2114, located at 12,701 U.S. Highway 64. The applicant is Design Team Sign Company, LLC, represented by David Baker with Fisher and Arnold. The use district is the CA Conservation Agricultural District with an approved special use permit. And the request of variances related to detached and attached sign package.
All right. I assume the applicant is present. And
Yes, sir,
Mr. Whitehead, perfect. Was this the one we started to hear and we wanted some more information on last week, last month?
I think the contested item on this case is related to one of the conditions of approval.
Why don't we move then to the applicant to have them talk with us about the conditions unless someone needs a full report. Is anybody on the, yep, nobody, okay. Is this Mr. Baker?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'm David Baker with Fisher and Arnold, and my address for the record is 9180 Crestwind Hills Drive, Memphis 38125. The owner, Mr. Don Parks, I believe, is on the phone as well, and hopefully between the two of us, we can answer any questions that you may all have.
Okay. Why don't we real quick get Mr. Parks to state his name and address for the record, and I'll swear you both in at the same time.
Sure. Don Parks with First Choice Farm and Lawn. And I guess best address is 305 U.S. Highway 51 Bypass North in Dyersburg, Tennessee, 38024.
Okay. Do you gentlemen swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes,
I
sir.
do.
Okay. Go ahead. Just one of you can go ahead and start.
Okay, this is David Baker again. As mentioned in the staff report, this project was approved in November of 2019 as a special use permit to allow what we consider more or less a commercial use for the sales and service of farm equipment as well as lawn and garden equipment as well. Prior to that, in 2004, this was a planned development for commercial uses, and appropriately so, I guess, for its location along Highway 64. But no activity was constructed on that, so the PD elapsed. Our request is for 29-foot maximum height pylon sign with attached signage on the north and west sides of the building. And we think and we feel that our justification for this is that one, we're on a 5-lane divided highway in this portion in front of our site with a posted speed limit of 65 miles per hour, which lends itself to a little bit higher actual speed to travel. Also, the commercial nature of the business, as I mentioned, it is a sales for farm lawn type equipment, and while it has a special use permit in the conservation agriculture, we feel that this more of a commercial in nature business and along the highway needs a little bit more visibility for signage and identification. In the area just north across the street, across Highway 64 is an industrial area. And then to the west of us at the interchange of 385 and 64 is a Shell station that has a larger, taller sign as well for identification of that. Additionally, we are about 76.5 feet from the travel lane to where our sign will be located. That's a substantial distance, and that we feel a shorter or smaller sign would not be as noticeable and visible based on that distance from the street. And in looking at the Unified Development Code, the chart in 4.97 on page 222, that chart talks about the height and areas for detached signage. And that's the chart that talks about, you're in zone 1 inside East, North, and South Parkway, zone 2 is inside Interstate 40, and Zone 3 is outside Interstate 40. And if we went with that for our commercial type use on an arterial, the maximum height of a sign would be 35 feet with a maximum square footage of 300. And our request is respectfully below that in size of the area as well as the height of 29. And like I mentioned earlier, just because of our commercial nature and the arterial aspect of the road, we feel that our request is justified. And I think, Mr. Parks, if you want to add anything to that, we'd be glad to turn it over to you, sir.
Sure. Thank y'all for having me on today. I really appreciate it. And we are so excited about coming to Memphis to do business, and our facility is nearing completion, hopefully at some point in July. So hopefully we can be open. So the signage that we have got selected, I already have purchased and sitting on the ground. So that's also a big concern of mine at the moment, that I've got this 29-foot sign, but it is, the sign's extremely tasteful. If you've seen the packet, it's a factory issued pylon. So it's nothing that's gonna, I think, deter from the aesthetics of the area. And it's typical across most Kubota dealerships that have been constructed, I guess, kind of here in the past few years, going with that brand theme. And especially with the quality of the facility that we have built there on 64, should be one of the premier dealerships in the United States as far as Kubota Tractor Corporation is concerned, and would really like to have that look and that feature along with this facility that we have invested so much time and money in. And then, you know, another big concern that David had mentioned is that section of highway right there on the Fayette County line. The road divides just before us, and it's kind of in a curve in a high-speed area. So, you know, I think it would help with visibility, number one, for consumer traffic, and hopefully a safety aspect of somebody not having to look too hard to exactly see what's going on there in that corner. We do have highway access that divides across the median there as far as turning into the property. But just because it is such a highly trafficked and nobody pays attention to that speed limit that's coming into Eads right there, that's just kind of our big concern of just catching that proper visibility. And we are set back off of the road due to a highway easement to where they constructed 64 there when they turned that into 4-lane. So that's kind of just the main concerns, and we're hoping we could get a little leniency on that for those reasons.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions of the board of the applicant? Seeing none, I have a question for staff real quick. So oftentimes when we have our conditions, there'll be a separate set of conditions if we choose to allow all variances requested, but I don't see those. Would there be anything helpful like that, Mr. Whitehead?
Well, the way the conditions are currently written, particularly condition number 1, I'm on page 26 of the staff report, right, allows wall signage that exceeds what would be permitted in the CA district. If you wanted to add a detached sign that exceeds the regulations of the district, it would appear to me to put it somewhere in condition number 1, probably between the existing first sentence and the existing second sentence.
Right.
So if you wanted to meet the applicant's wishes, that's probably where you'd put it.
We just want to put it there. Okay. I know, any questions for the applicant before we discuss? Hearing none. Thank you all very much. And Mr. White, there was no opposition to this case, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. With that, is there someone that will give us a motion to approve BOA 21-14 as conditioned by staff? So moved. Second. All right. Being moved and seconded. Is there any discussion regarding these 2 additional signs they're wanting to have? I mean, I've been through there. It's a pretty fast-moving street on 64. And the signs are fairly far from the street. It seems like a fairly,
Yeah, and you're starting to see a lot of
inauspicious, like,
industrial development too, right there.
yeah, agreed. So I personally don't have a problem with them having the pole sign as requested and the wayfinding sign as requested, but I didn't know what the board thought on that.
I agree. I mean, there are other industrial businesses out that way. Sorry. There are other industrial businesses out that way that don't have that level of signage. You know, so there's already precedence with competing or, you know, similar entities with less signage, and they're found. And it's not a bad thing to slow up before you turn in off a highway to see something, especially with people in navigation systems, you know, getting there. So, you know, I'm not against the wall signs. I think the pole signs are, as far as the size, it's a little large, but I mean, I don't have any conclusion. I mean, it's doable. It's just, I don't know, does it set a precedent or, you know?
I would say the difference of what you said and just how my brain works is the other industrial users are industrial warehouses, logistical places that are they're not there to get a customer base in, to where if they're selling tractors and lawn equipment and stuff like that, they're trying to have their presence known by customers. That's just the only difference I see between the industrial folks and the retailers.
Yeah, I guess the other ones, because I guess the other ones cross into Fayette County.
Yeah,
so
they're
Christie Cut Stone,
yeah.
They're in Fayette County. Okay.
Other thoughts? Then I would make a friendly motion if they would allow it to, in item number 1 would now read, 2 wall signs shall be permitted, each with a maximum area of 92 square feet. A pylon sign as detailed in the staff report, as well as wayfinding sign, the wayfinding sign in the staff report shall also be approved, and then all other signs shall comply with all standards of the UDC. Is there a problem with that motion?
No.
Okay. Does that make proper sense to you, Mr. Whitehead?
Yes, sir. I wrote this down as you were speaking. A pylon and a wayfinding sign, as shown in the staff report, are also allowed as a new second sentence.
Okay. I think that makes sense. Any other discussion, or are you all prepared to vote? I think we're prepared to vote. Mr. Whitehead, will you give us a roll call vote, please?
Yes, sir. And for the board members who missed my initial announcement, if you press the button on your microphone and it turns green, that means you're on. Mr. Melandry?
Yes.
Ms. Doss?
Yes.
Ms. Baker?
Yes.
Vice Chair Savage-Towns?
Yes.
Ms. Skurlock?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Claybrook?
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
That's 8 ayes.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. You've been approved. Mr. Whitehead, you'll call the next case, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Item number 2 is docket BOA 2021-38, located at 4048 Minden. The applicants are Timothy and Christine Taylor. The representative is Don Conway. The use district is the R10 Single Family District, and the request are variances from 272B1, 272B2, related to an accessory garage.
Okay, and I assume both the applicant and the opposition are with us, Mr. Penzis? Can you tell? Okay. And Mr. Baucus, would you give us a staff report, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Box with the Division of Planning and Development. First and foremost, good afternoon to you and welcome back. This application is before you is 4048 Minden Road. It's a variance for an accessory garage and workshop building. The applicant is Timothy and Christine Taylor. They are asking for variances for the height of the structure, which is currently under construction. Next slide, please. The planning area is in the Hedge Hills development, Edgefield subdivision in East Memphis, just north of Warner Grove and east of North Graham Street. Next slide. Land use in this area is primarily, as you can see by the graphic, residential single family. The zoning is R10, which is the lots in this area are much larger than R10 standards. Next slide, please. The street view, which shows the existing home. The highest point of the ridge line is what we want to pay our close attention to. The site plan is listed, is to the right of this graphic. It shows the accessory structure being located in the rear yard. It is far away from the existing home. It is 2 stories in height with a garage on the first floor and a storage attic space up in the second upper story. The site plan shows compliance with the setbacks for zoning with the exception of the east property line. A storage detached garage structure this height should be at least 20 feet from the side yard if it's higher than the existing structure. Next slide, please. The front elevation, it shows a very nice detached garage with a front gable and arched double garage with primarily 100% brick on the ground floor and lap siding on the upper story. Next slide, please. In conclusion, we reviewed the application in accordance with the applicant's request, and they submitted a site plan to illustrate their request to allow the garage workshop building to exceed the height. The principal structure is 25.5 feet in height. The accessory garage building is approximately 28 feet in height as measured along the ridge line. A practical difficulty exists in the exceptional shape and size of an interior lot with greater front and side yard setbacks, which are required by restrictive covenants as recorded in Hedge Hill subdivision. Of course, governmental bodies do not enforce restrictive covenants. However, if they decide they want to appeal the side yard, that's a private matter between the neighborhood association and the applicant. The height of and the distance to the side yard for the accessory garage structure and workshop building is governed by the zoning code, and the variances are warranted for the height to exceed the principal structure. The findings of fact, next slide please, have been met, and the lot exhibits an unusual characteristics of being an exceptional shape and size at the time the lot was created, and exhibits greater front and side yard setbacks governed by the restricted covenants placed on the subdivision plan. We have recommended approval with conditions, and those conditions are on page 11. There are photos of the rear yard of the home. I think the contention is primarily from the opposition that the structure is too high and too large in the rear yard. I will let Mr. Conway go through those photos that are listed in this presentation. I just want to let him know we do have the photos in our presentation if he wants to go through those and share those with you. But we did receive opposition from 2 adjacent property owners that are adjacent to this property to the rear and to the north of the applicants of the subject property. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. And this case, as you remember, was held from last month.
Great. Thank you very much. Is there any questions from the Board of Staff at this point?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Jackson. I have 2 questions. Maybe it's in this report. I just didn't see it. The first one is exactly what is the height to the ridge line? I guess that's where it's measured on this accessory structure. And the second question is exactly how far is it from the property line where it's too close?
The first question, the accessory garage structure and workshop building is approximately 28.5 feet in height.
Okay.
And the side yard line, the east, you're referring to the east side yard?
The one where it's encroaching.
I believe it's 5 feet. Can't really see that.
I think it's 5 feet 3
yes,
inches.
5 feet 3 inches. So.
Thank you.
But keep in mind that that's an encroachment that's of course, you know, that's the variance they're asking for.
Right.
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes, sir. Mr. Marcus, you mentioned that there was two, oppositions. One, I take it, is the property to the east, and you said the other one was where?
I believe they're both to the north.
Both to the north?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great, thank you.
Which, yeah, I didn't have
Rose. Okay, other questions of staff at this time?
I have one more question, if you don't mind. What exactly is the height to the ridge line of the, principal home on the property?
it's approximately 25 feet, 25 and a half feet.
So it's 3.1 feet approximately higher. Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions? All right, then we'll move on to the applicants. Is the, can we get the applicant with us, Mr. Penzis?
Yes, Don Conway.
All right, Mr. Conway, can you hear us?
I can hear you guys.
Okay, can you give your name and address for the record, please?
Yes, it's Don Conway. It's Conway Design Group. That's 5240 Poplar Avenue.
Okay, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Okay, then go ahead and share with us, please.
Well, like Mr. Bacchus was saying, we're trying to, this had already, it gone through code enforcement for building permits, and we assumed everything was good to go until the framing inspection started to happen. Then he had a question about the height. On that plan that we have, it does represent the height of the building being 18.8. This being the accessory structure. And we started this preliminary drawing just probably 18 months ago, but the ridge height, and we didn't know the height of the principal structure until the contractor had the engineer go out and actually give that height. So we were unaware of that until the framing inspector had mentioned the height of the principal structure. So it is above, and that also has something to do with the grade for which the workshop was put on too. It's probably another 10 to 12 inches higher than the grade from the principal structure. So with it being permitted, and I talked to permit office and put everything through them before we even got to this point. And now Mr. Hamilton, I think he's with us too, the contractor, has had to put a halt to where he stands on this. This meeting. We were put off from the first one because no one could hear anything. That meeting a month ago. We're asking for that variance. It's 3 inches from that. That'd be the east property line for this structure. And then the other thing too, it does sit. It's a strange lot, and most of the setback, most of the property is on the front of this house, which makes it fairly difficult, to have a structure as my client was asking for. So our assumption, we always thought or assumed that the mean height was the definition of the building. And all along, that's kind of what we went by. We actually had it higher than that, and we went down to 18 foot 8 inches on the mean height. Keep it low. So yeah, we are asking for a variance on this, so that he's got a lot of time and effort working this. And I understand we do have from a neighbor on the backside of this property. So if you would, would like to hear from, I think it's, and I'll leave that up to you guys to call that, but that's where we stand, and we're trying to ask for that variance on the side yard.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
Yes.
I know that the opposition with us are the neighbors, I guess, on Rose Road. Have we
Yes, sir.
heard anything from the neighbor that's actually on Minden to the east, that's closest to this actual structure?
No, sir, we have not.
Okay. So, but I guess the applicants or the owners never talked to them about it or anything, or they just?
Well, they're neighbors. I assume they have spoken, obviously, but
yeah. Okay.
The opposition to the rear side of it.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Conley? Yeah, Ms. Baker.
I'm looking at this. Sorry, I'm looking at this property, and I'm seeing what looked to be either some big shrubs or trees or something along that east line of the property. Are they still there, or were they removed for this building?
I'm sorry. Those were photos that were taken yesterday.
Taken when?
They were taken yesterday.
No, I'm looking at the aerial photograph.
Like the Google map.
Yeah.
Do we have access to these photos from yesterday?
Yes, sir.
Could we see them?
Yes, they're in the presentation.
All right. Let's pull those up real quick.
That's looking directly to the north. That's more in that northeast corner.
Yeah, that'd be facing west.
On the second story.
Mm-hmm. This way.
On the side porch, I think.
All right.
Ms. Shipdiggs, go to the one right before this. I think this is the property line that Ms. Baker was asking about, the eastern property line? Or is that the northern property line? Okay. So it doesn't look like we have any pictures from yesterday of the eastern property line.
Okay.
Can you, Ms. Doss, everything on the record?
Sorry. I am directionally challenged. That's on the record as well. I thought Ms. Baker was referring to the front view of the house, which is different because I pulled up Google Maps as well, which is different. The Google Maps view does show a lot of landscaping across the front versus this photo that was in the presentation from the front side. So that's facing what direction? The front is right. The front of the home is facing?
The front of the home faces south.
North, south.
Yeah, it's on the north side of the street.
Y'all aren't, that's not. It's facing which way?
The house
Yes,
is facing south.
facing south, okay. All right. I thought you were, Ms. Baker, were you talking about the front? Well, what I was talking about is there in the staff report, I'm trying to see what page it is. There is an aerial photograph from the register's page, and it shows that it looks like there are substantial vegetation along that east line. And so my question was whether it's still there or was it taken out with, what page is that on? I can't.
Page 3.
Okay, page 3.
No, those are still there. I know which ones you're talking about.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Point of information.
Yeah.
In my presentation, there is a current photo.
Okay.
And I can pass it around if you'd like. But there's a current photo in and around page 3 or 4 of the presentation with a street view and site plan.
Mm-hmm.
It shows, this is a current photo from April last month.
Okay, yeah, if you can pass it around. I have the presentation, but it's kind of dark on that side.
But that's not it.
Not it, okay, gotcha.
Right.
Those are actual photos as well, but there's another photo in the presentation that shows that east property.
Well, see, this really doesn't help me because it's the front. And what I was looking at on the aerial is the backyard,
Kind of a
you know,
side.
which is where the building is being constructed in the rear yard. So. But you can't see past the front in that.
Right. Any other questions of the applicant? All right, hearing none, gentlemen, unless you have something else to say, I have you all reserved with like 5 minutes to add to your rebuttal for a total of 7, unless you have anything else to add at this time. That's still there. And with that, I think, and this was our only applicant or those in favor. Now we can move to opposite. We have 2 people in opposition, is that correct?
No. That is correct.
Okay.
Mr. Joel Smith, I believe, is the proposer.
And that looks like it's in one.
Okay.
And it appears Mr. Smith is the only one on the line, right?
Okay.
Right next
Mr.
to the
Smith?
building. What I'm talking about is back here.
They want to take another one.
Is Mr. Smith here?
This is a, this is an old.
He has one moment while we get him on.
Sure, not a problem.
That's right. There we go.
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
We can, thank you. If you'll give your name and address for the record for us.
Sure. Joel Smith, 270 North Rose Road, Memphis, Tennessee, 38117.
Okay, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the true stuff you got?
I do.
All right, go ahead. You have, you're the only opposition joining us. You have 10 minutes if you need it.
Okay. I don't think I'll need 10 minutes, but thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm Joel Smith. I'm at 270 North Rose Road. Our house shares the back property line with the subject property. I think there's mine and 2 more that are on North Rose. I mean, everything you guys have talked about makes sense to me. From our perspective, our street is the one that is impacted by this garage. Our neighborhood slopes down from Minden towards North Rose, so the height is impacted both by it being tall, but also by our houses sitting. I don't know the number, but say 15 or so feet below the subject property. When you walk down North Rose Road, you can look behind my neighbor's house, and it jumps out at you. In my backyard and our neighbor's backyard, because of the height and it's set back as far as it possibly could be. I mean, it is both intrusive and invasive to our privacy. I want to be a good neighbor and want to figure it out. But when this first was being built, my wife called code on January 22nd to complain and was informed that all permits had been filed and the structure was in compliance. The following week, when the second floor went up on January 28th, we called again and were given the same response. I've got some pictures I can share with y'all. I don't know exactly how to get them to you, but I'm happy to email or text. And you know, I'd also welcome anybody to come stand in our backyard and our neighbors. And I think everybody on the phone would agree that what we're looking at is going to have a negative impact on our property value.
Josh, is there a way for him to email pictures so we can see? Is that possible? No?
Not, I mean, we might have to roll this case.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I mean, they could, is it done? Is that thing?
Yes.
Mr. Smith is on the call by phone, I believe.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, I mean, I think you can drop it in the chat or present it.
I can, I'm on Zoom too. I can try and show a picture. Let me see here.
You have to allow him to present though.
Yeah. Any other statements or, well, I think I understand your situation, that you're talking about. I don't know if a picture would necessarily help or not.
Okay.
But I do get it. Are there any questions for Mr. Smith?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead,
Chairman.
Ms. Baker.
Are there any windows on that, elevation of the building that face your property?
Yes, there are two dormers that are staring into my bedroom. And actually, there might be a third on the backside. I'm not sure.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question of
Yes, ma'am.
staff. Is it too late for me to ask?
No, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Bacchus. If that, building, number one, are they violating the setback to the north?
No.
Okay. But if they pushed it away from that east line, they would be, right? Because of the way that north line angles.
If I understand your question correctly, if they pushed it west, would it be?
West. If they pushed it west, they would end up too close to the north
It
line.
would be closer, yes.
Okay.
But keep in mind now, this is already.
I understand.
Okay.
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, when I look, I mean, I know where you're going with that. Like, the setback to the people that it matters to isn't a problem. It's really just the height, and I look back in the staff report, it's 28 feet tall versus the 25 and a half it could be. So you're talking 2.5 feet. Even if it was lowered that much, it doesn't really change the situation of what could be built there. I'm wondering more if there's like some sort of answer of landscaping of some sort to block it, just to make it a little more palatable as opposed to the structure itself.
And I'm looking so if you look at these elevations, you've got one dormer on the rear, and then you've got dormers on the right and left side. So right and left side are facing east and west. The one dormer in the rear is facing north. And it's the smallest of the, what page is this?
9? Is it 9? Oh, that's the front elevation on 9.
They are attachments.
Yeah,
They're attachments.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Baker.
So it seems like one solution might be to that one dormer that's facing north might not have a window in it.
That was also my question. I mean, is it possible just not to have the dormer on the backside? And then what was the difficulty with shaving the 3 feet? I don't think I'm clear on why we couldn't shave 3 feet off of there. Because it's a two-story?
That would be a question probably for the applicant when we go back, if that's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's already built. I don't know how you can shave.
Yeah.
On the way.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Smith while we have him on the line? All right. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for joining us. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
With that, we'll go back to the applicant to maybe answer some of these questions on what they can and can't do to help shield these neighbors from this structure. And so is Mr. Conway back with us to speak?
I am now, yes.
Okay, all right, you have a total of 7 minutes if you need it.
Yeah. Saying about the window in the back, I mean, it's not an issue to remove that window, and that would be the north side of the building.
Okay.
That wouldn't be an issue. already spoke to the contractor as well as the owner.
Did you frost
The other item is the two property lines to the north. That building sets, it's probably 45 feet from the gentleman's property. Well, the one that's on that would be the northeast corner. And then the other, if you went as close to that porch as possible, that dimension is roughly 35 feet. We're not really getting into that. We're working on 20 feet on those. We're just asking for the 5 foot on the other side. If we did slide it over to the west, which obviously at this point with the foundation, seismic, all the bolt downs are in it. This thing's already framed. It's got shingles on it. That far along.
Well, that's probably not a good option anyway, and it just gets things closer to the neighbors that have a problem. Knowing the property, what could we do is there any, how much landscaping will we need to somewhat shield the properties on the northwest? Is there some shrubs we could put there that are going to grow fairly quickly in the next couple of years to cause that to be a little bit more palatable?
Yes, and that was an option I was going to bring about when Mr. Smith was on the phone. We can certainly do that. We can get together to talk about that. So, yes, we would be glad to do that. I do understand what he's saying because their property does drop down. There's not much the homeowner can do about that grade difference between their property and ours.
And you don't know of any way, with the current design, getting rid of 2.5 feet really isn't much of an option without reworking everything, correct?
I just don't see it at all. Not at this point. That's just gonna. They've got a budget and they're already over that budget, so I just don't see. So,
are there any other questions for the applicant? All right, hearing none, I assume unless you have something to add, I assume we're ready to discuss. Do you have anything else you need to add, Mr. Conway?
No, sir. I think that'll do it. But I do add the fact that we are up for adding landscaping if that's necessary.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. With that, unless there's any questions for the applicant, we'll move to our discussion. So if we could get a motion to approve BOA 21-0038 as conditioned by staff.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Do y'all have any? Mr. Jackson, I was hoping you would talk a little bit about that. Yeah. I was about to call on you, but I was like, maybe he'll just volunteer.
I think there's a very simple solution here. I mean, the real problem is, I don't think even if you could take 3 feet off top of the structure, you're still going to see it. Mm-hmm. It's still going to have the same sight line, and the distance the neighbors are away from it's not going to make any difference. The simple solution is just to plant some large evergreen, not shrubs, but trees along the property line where the view line is. And I don't even think it's a good idea to take the dormer window, to be very honest with you, on the north side out. I think if you plant a series of evergreen trees along the northwest property line where the units on Rose Street back up to it, I think that would take care of the problem. The person I'm surprised it doesn't have a problem with the person on the east side. So obviously, it is what it is. The real culprit here, which makes this a problem, is the fact that just the topography sits lower to the west. And irregardless of what you do, other than plant some trees that'll get, 30 or 40 feet tall, not going to solve that issue. So I think some landscaping there, 5 or 6, 7 trees there would take care of that problem.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Thank you.
other comments? Would you, I'll ask Mr. Jackson to talk again. Could you craft a condition for us?
Yes, sir. I'll give it a shot at that. As part of the condition should probably be, the applicant is required to plant a landscaping screen of evergreen trees along the adjacent property line to the northwest to screen out his facility from their property. And subject to the approval of OPD, of course, the Secretary, Administrative Site Plan, Landscape Plan Review.
Okay.
Do we want to add timing to that?
Oh, I think it should be tied to the
completion of the
occupancy.
project?
Yeah,
Occupancy.
the certificate of occupancy.
Yeah.
CO. Yeah, the CO. Yes, Ms. Baker.
Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Jackson, I struggle with it a little bit because, and I know that you can get some big shrubs at planting, but it's going to take a long time, to get anything up to the height of this dormer. So if it's not a big problem to not have the window in the dormer, that would be my only addition, I guess, to what you said, that they would not have the dormer window facing that property line because of, for many, 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 many years, those shrubs are not going to make any difference.
Well, I know they didn't have do you want to say? You go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I know they didn't have a problem with losing the windows to the north. I think the west.
That's the only one I'm talking
the west
about.
ones they need.
Yeah, that's the only one I'm talking about. If they don't have a problem with it, it's an immediate solution to.
Part of the issue.
It's somebody just, backyards are different from front yards to me, that they want a little higher degree of privacy than a front yard. And, so, anyway, that's it.
Jackson, do you have anything to add?
Ms. Becky, yeah, that's one of the reasons. I agree with you other than taking the window. I look at it, if I had a backyard, I was building that structure, I'd want to be able to look out my structure at my own backyard or my own property. And I agree with you, a shrub will take a long time to grow, so consequently, that's why I say we should go with an evergreen tree. Something, and I'll throw out a suggestion like a Leland cypress, and it should be planted, at 10 to 12 feet tall, planted 6 feet on center, and they have a tendency to grow anywhere from 2 to 3 feet a year. So if you put it in at 10 or 12 foot tall, in a year it's 15 feet, the trajectory and angle will give some privacy there. Mm-hmm. And that tree can get up to 35, 40 feet tall pretty quick. So that's just my thought.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes, sir.
You still have the floor. You've made a motion that hasn't been seconded. So may I make a suggestion to breathe into your condition or your amendment?
Yes, sir.
And that is at the end of the condition number 1, I'm reading from page 11 of the staff report. At the end of condition 1, we'll add a new sentence that reads, the north side or the northern facade of the accessory garage workshop structure shall contain no windows on its second floor, period. Then add a new condition number 2 that reads, the applicant shall plant a series of evergreen trees 6 feet on center along the west-northwest property line in an effort to screen those properties. And then finally, the old condition number 2 is now a condition 3, and it shall read, the final plan, which reflects conditions 1 and 2, shall be subject, etc., as it's currently worded. And at the end of that new condition 3, a new sentence or a new add-on that shall read, prior to a certificate of occupancy being issued, period.
Yes.
Do you want to add the 12 feet, or is that how they come standard 12 feet?
I think that the administrative site plan review could deal with that, but the tree should be a minimum of 10 foot tall.
So
when
do we
installed.
want to explicitly state that?
I'll add it.
Okay.
10 feet in height. Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Yeah, okay.
Do we have any opposition?
No, I would agree with that. I mean, like, you can only do so much. Even if we had built this at 25.5 feet ridge line, those windows could be exactly where they are and be completely conforming. So I think we're given a chance to make something better than it could have ever been by doing this, hopefully for the neighbors.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question for staff. With the administrative review, does it guarantee that the trees will always be there in the case that something happens?
No, nor do I think anyone in this room or in this universe would like it to be. And here's why I say that. We do not, I find that it is a very uncomfortable situation in which government tries to enforce conditions forevermore in someone's residential backyard. It's one thing if we can get it planted, and most people like green growies. Most people keep green growies, but I find it's almost impossible to do the inspection, number one, and to find a judge that will uphold that citation. So take that note as a kind of a asterisk on all of our conditions we've just added.
Very good.
So with that being said, I'd probably be more inclined to support removing the north window as condition in addition to the landscape.
Yeah. That we can always enforce.
Okay. And that is in our condition now. That became condition number 2?
But that's the new tail end of condition number 1.
No, okay. Is the removal of the window.
So I have a question. Instead of removing the window, is there a way to use some sort of frosted glass to where they still get natural light? And I'm assuming it's upstairs, some sort of bedroom, something. I obviously have no idea, but I mean, you can't see through frosted glass. Just an idea. Or even an elevated strip instead of, that a normal sized person wouldn't be able to see through unless they were on a ladder.
There's a
Clear story window. Something
Technical term is much better than mine, Brian.
Mr. Rockets, what did you call it?
A clear story window. It's
CLESTORY.
Okay.
a window above your height.
Sure, yeah, like you'll see in bathrooms.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm not against that. I'm trying to think of how to state it, that they can either remove it, have an opaque window, or have a clear story window.
Well, Mr. Claybrook, the applicant did testify he was okay with removing it.
No, I'm just trying to be courteous. You put a window in, you're putting a window in for light. You remove a window, you get no light.
Alternative.
I agree with Mr. Whitehead, though. The more complicated you make the condition, the harder it's going to be for code enforcement to be able to enforce it, number one, and then, of course, if anything ever happened that it was challenged in court, good chance it would not be supported.
Okay. I'm convinced.
That's a non-lawyer's opinion.
Any other comments before we vote? Seeing none, I assume you're ready to vote. Mr. Whitehead, would you give us a roll call, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. As amended, Mr. Claybrook.
Yes.
Ms. Spurlock.
Yes.
Mr. Savage Town.
Yes, I find that the standards of 9.22.6 of the UDC are being met. It will not be unduly detrimental to the properties in the vicinity.
Mr. Jackson.
Yes.
Ms. Baker.
Yes.
Ms. Dermal-Azri.
Yes.
Ms. Doss.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
That's 8 ayes.
All right, you have been approved as conditioned. Thank you for coming down, both of you. Mr. Whitehead, would you call the next case for us?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Agenda item number 3 is docket BOA 2143, located at 4918 William Arnold. The applicant is PAX Memphis Recovery, represented by Cindy Reeves. The use district is the residential work RW district, and the request is a use variance from section 252 to allow an inpatient care services establishment with outpatient rehabilitation and counseling.
Okay, very good. And I believe we never really heard this one because we had a problem possibly with notice.
Correct.
Okay, so is the staff person here able to present? Very good. Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, I'm wanting to verify with Mr. Penzis, is our opposition on the call?
It does not appear so.
Okay.
Okay, so do we need to, I'd like to hear it.
Clark Chief Diggs, Division of Planning and Development. The item before you is BOA 21-0043. The applicant is Pax Memphis Recovery. The location is 4918 William Arnold Road, and the request is a use variance to allow inpatient care services at an existing outpatient rehabilitation clinic and counseling center. This case was held for a period of 1 month at the last meeting of the Board of Adjustment due to insufficient public notice. So the property is zoned BOA 18-002 with underlying residential work. Use variance was approved back in 2018 to allow the existing outpatient facility to operate in the residential work district. And the land use is currently commercial. This proposal is consistent with the Memphis 3.0 general plan, and you can see pages 12 through 13 of the staff report for the consistency analysis. This is a site photo of the subject property from William Arnold Road looking northeast. The current site plan that was approved under BOA 18-002 is not being proposed, or there are not any changes being proposed to that site plan by the applicant at this time. And so here you'll see the site plan as approved under BOA 18-002, showed the existing one-story building, and all of the parking that is shown on the site plan is what's being proposed for the current use variance as well. So again, this application was held at the April 28th meeting of the board due to insufficient public notice. We did remail public notice to include the adjacent properties that are across William Arnold Road to ensure that all of the adjacent property owners were aware of the change in use that's being proposed. And we did receive 7 letters of opposition that were included in the staff report for this meeting. So the applicant is seeking relief from section 2.5.2 of the Unified Development Code to allow limited inpatient services at the existing rehabilitation clinic and counseling center, which is classified as a social service institution under the UDC. The existing facility was approved by the Board of Adjustment under docket BOA 18-02. However, the use of the subject property for inpatient care services is beyond the scope of this original approval. And staff finds that the granting of this variance will not cause substantial detriment to the public good, nor will it substantially impair the intent and purpose of an adopted plan or the code. And with that, staff recommends approval with conditions, which are listed here on the screen. The additional conditions not shown here, that's part of BOA 18-02, limits the hours for the outpatient services from 9 to 5. But that would also still be in effect in addition to these conditions. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shute-Diggs. Is there any question for staff at this time?
I do. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Quick question. On the prior approval under docket BOA 1802, now we approved a similar rehabilitation clinic for outpatient, but now they're requesting inpatient and outpatient.
Yes, inpatient services that would be limited to no more than 8 individuals at any one time.
Okay.
Yes.
And is that including the outpatient traffic?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Baker, did you have a question?
Yes. I have a couple of questions. The 8, you said 8, would they live there?
Yes, for temporary periods of time. The applicant can speak more specifically to what the length of time would be.
Okay.
Individual.
My second question, is this a use variance?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd be curious to know what the opposition was. What was the issue with opposition, just generally?
Yes. The major concerns were the potential increase in traffic along William Arnold Road. And again, at this time, the applicant is not proposing to increase the number of parking spaces, but the inpatient services would have these individuals living at the facility and may or may not increase the traffic. So that's not really been addressed by the applicant at this time. So that might be a good question for them to see if they have any answers to that or solutions to that problem. The other concerns are mostly about the actual use for inpatient services. There are concerns of adjacent property owners. There are a lot of other businesses on William Arnold Road that are concerned about the kind of character of the individuals that are already kind of populating the street during the daytime, during the approved hours, 9 to 5, and they don't want to increase any kind of loitering outside the facility on that street after hours as well.
So with the inpatient services, and maybe this is a question for the applicant, but with inpatient services, are they in and out for work, or are they there most of the day, or?
It's my understanding that they would be living there full time.
So they're not in and out to go to work or wherever else. They're there all day. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, staff?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Go ahead. According to the land use map, I want to make sure I understand. The color that's indicated there, the majority of it is office. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, with that, we'll move on to our applicant. Mr. Penzis, who's joining us today? Is it Ms. Reeves?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Ms. Reeves, will you give us your name and address for the record, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Cindy Reeves, that's our consulting, 5909 Shelby Oaks Drive, Suite 200. I also have Mr. Brent Gaston on the line. And Brent, can you give your name and address for the record?
Sure. Brent Gaston, and my address is 899 Azalea Street, Boca Raton, Florida, 33486.
Okay, very good. Do you both swear to tell the truth? Do you have more?
I have Caleb that actually runs the facility here.
Oh, that'd be great.
Caleb Brooks, 7615 Parkmont, Memphis, Tennessee, 38125.
So he runs all the day-to-day operations. So I thought it would be very helpful to have him here also.
Oh, perfect. Anyone else before I swear you in?
No, sir, that's it.
Well, I jumped the gun, so now I'm trigger shy. So, do you all swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
We do.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead. Y'all have 10 minutes to speak on this if you need it.
Okay, I hope we won't take 10 minutes. We also held this case last month prior to not knowing that we didn't have proper notice so that we could meet with the neighbors. The neighbors reached out to us. I felt we had a really good meeting with the neighbors. Mr. Gaston gave them his contact information, and of course they have my contact information. If there ever were any issues, then they could call us. PAX has been operating here since 2018 and has had no issues. This is a temporary use until they can find a larger location and will be occupied by PAX patients only. PAX screens their patients and has a zero tolerance policy. The inpatient services are typically 3 to 5 days just for the detox. They have no loitering. The inpatient cars will not be parked at the facility. They'll be parked where they live. If we are approved, it would allow PAX to go ahead and get the necessary license needed that they're going to have to transfer to their new facility, and it would just give them a jump start on that. Tax patients are insured, and people reaching out for help, we probably all know someone who has or needs services tax provides, that they're not just people that come off of the streets that come to this facility. They're people like you and me. So, the Gaskins mom, Mr. Gaskins' mom and brother own and operate the business next door, and I can assure you, if there were any issues, they would be the first to complain. So, I'm going to let Brent say a couple of things, and then we'll be here to answer questions that we really wish that we could get approved.
Well, like I said, we've been operating for 3 years there without any incidences. When we pride ourselves on trying to provide quality health care for our people that are in need of it. All of our patients are here voluntarily. You know, they're supervised, and we're in the process of trying to locate a larger facility, and so that we can offer these higher levels of care. And we just want to try to get this started at this location so that we can move on somewhere else. So,
and as far as traffic, Brent, can you answer the?
Well, there's not going to be any additional traffic added as a result of this from what we had before. Most of the patients are picked up and transported together to the facility, and there's very few people that come in their own vehicles. And the people staying there for detox will not be driving their own car there. Most likely, they'll be picked up and transported there and dropped off. So the people, my 85-year-old, my mom's about to turn 86. She works in the office next door, and I have no problem having my mom working there. We're going over there to the office, you know what I mean, with the patients that are there, because these aren't people coming out of prison. These aren't, violent criminals. They're not people that I would even be concerned with whatsoever living next door to. I mean, I understand that, a lot of people have misconceptions about people that have drug and alcohol problems. Most of them are just normal people that their lives, they made bad choices, and they're trying to do something to change that.
And with that, we respectfully would ask for your approval of this request. We're here to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
Yes.
Yeah.
Quick question. On the patients, are they referred in, or is this strictly a volunteer walk-in? Do they sign in online, or what does that process look like?
Well, they're referred to us from other facilities. Maybe they might see us read about us online on the internet and call us. They'll be pre-screened. You know what I mean? They go through a strict questionnaire about their situation. And depending on what level of care they need as to whether or not we would accept them. You know what I mean? We don't take psychiatric patients. We don't handle those kind of patients at all. So I mean, the people with that come to us voluntarily that actually have insurance. Most of them have jobs, or their parents have insurance, or things of that nature.
So to be clear, there's no walk-up type service, right? They're just referrals.
Oh, no, they don't. People don't just walk up and drive up out of for services. No.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, most of them are. I think I heard you say most of them are transported to and from wherever they're going together on the.
Yeah, we have vans to pick people up and transport them to the therapy sessions.
Okay, so additional parking is not necessarily needed, or additional traffic isn't going to be an issue?
Yeah, no. It's not going to make any difference in the amount of traffic that we're going to have. It's not going to change anything. The majority of the traffic in that area all comes from the traffic flowing from the post office next door.
Mm-hmm. And going in and out of that, right behind that
we're right there next
shopping strip.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Aaron Way.
Yeah, Aaron Way. Mr. Chairman. This is Mr. Jackson.
Sir, can you speak to what the visitation policies would be for the proposed 8 members and what the hours would be for that, if any?
Actually, there probably will not be any visitation. There's never usually visitation for people in detox. You know what I mean? They're there for the 3 to 5 days that they do their detox. So there's no visitation during that time period because they're coming off they're coming off of whatever it is they're on. And most of them don't really want to talk to anybody anyway.
You said they're probably,
whether it's alcohol or whatever it may be.
Yes, sir. But your words were there probably won't. So let me ask that question again. During the detox period, you're saying there will not be or there may be visitation?
Caleb, can you answer that? I don't believe that there's any visitation during detox.
No, sir. There will not be visitation. We try to stick with strict HIPAA guidelines. We're governed by the Joint Commission. So during their time, I think in healthcare it's hard to give approximates because it can always be extenuating circumstances. But our guidelines so far, with us being operational for 3 years, with that level of care, nobody generally has visitation. So there will not be any, sir. No visitation.
Right. Now that's during the detox period. Will there be patients staying there after the detox period? And if so, will there be visitation for those patients?
No, sir. As they continue down the level of care, even when they call it residential, that there's no visitation that occurs at at those locations at 4918 and the other one for the clients. No, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay.
This is a 28-day program, I assume?
Yes, ma'am. Sometimes it can. It's not 28-day programs are normally state and government mandated, or sometimes with insurance. So ours normally is dictated by the insurance provider. So there's no set amount of time per se. But I guess it is comparison to a 28-day program. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Unless y'all have something else, let me check real quick. Mr. Pensis, did we ever get any opposition to join?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right, and gentlemen, there's no opposition at this point. I know there was opposition letters. Do y'all have anything else to share with us before we start to discuss?
I would like to say, there is a huge need for this type service. You just don't realize how many people do need this kind of help and how good these kind of programs are. Mr. Gaston, you've been clean and sober for how many years because of a facility similar to this in Boca Raton, and that's what gave you the passion to open this here.
As of June 21st, I'll have 21 years.
And it totally changed his life. That's what we want to continue doing, is to help people. So we would appreciate your approval if you could help us on that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Reed.
Thank you.
With that, let's get a motion on the floor to approve BOA 21-0043 as conditioned by staff.
So moved.
Second.
Moving second. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
I can see you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Well, we don't have any opposition on the line, but people took time to write letters and get them in by the deadline, and I read every one of them. And, I'm troubled by this also because I don't think it meets the requirements for a use variation. Number one is supposed to have unusual physical conditions of the property that are different from the other properties. Well, I just don't see this particular property as being much different from all the rest of them on the street. They're all houses for the most part that are converted to businesses. And the second part of the requirement is that because of this physical difference, it cannot be used for any use permitted in the district, live, work.
Well, I mean, number one, it's hard to make that case because it is in use right now. And number two, all those other buildings are in uses permitted by live work, which office is one of the permitted uses. So, you know, taken all together, and I certainly am moved by the need for this kind of use. I mean, we really do need it, and there are people out there who benefit from it. But I just see, I'm not sure this is the right place for it, and it doesn't meet the requirements. So that's, I'm inclined to not vote for it. If I was going to vote for it, and they're saying they don't want to stay there anyway, and then I'd say put a time limit on it. And that would address some of the things in the letters that if they did run into having some problems, they would be able to do something about it. So that's it.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure I'm clear on understanding. The use variance is for the adding the inpatient part of it, correct? Because we already have approved the outpatient or the facility itself with the outpatient services. So the use variance now is just adding the inpatient.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
I think Ms. Baker gave a good point. They're talking about moving it anyway. Let's give them a reason to move by putting a time limit on it if we're going to approve it. I don't really know what that time limit would be. For some reason, I think 3 years, but that may be too long. You might think that's crazy. I mean, that's just what came out. That's what we're discussing. I got some bad looks.
I was thinking two.
2 years.
Sounds reasonable to me.
24 months.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a problem in doing a 24-month sunset on this? I don't see anybody nodding no to that.
No.
So we'd add that as
No. I would think a year would be enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's an incentive to allow them to do what they want to do, get their license in place. And if they said, I thought he said they were looking for a place now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, things happen. So I would maybe go in the middle, maybe 18 months, if not 2 years, because stuff happens.
I'm with Ms. Dawes. That, and then we're talking, we are moving patients that are going through a process.
Mm-hmm.
So I think to try to disrupt that process, at least giving them 2 years, will kind of give them a working plan to even work with their patients in transitioning those patients, especially those that are inpatient. That's why I think 2 years was a comfortable number in my thought.
Okay.
I would support 2, but not 3.
2, but not 3. Thank you, Mr. Malazri. Other
At
comments?
some point, we'll get a motion on the floor.
Yeah, we got the motion. We're
The main motion, but the amended.
Oh, yeah, that's what we're getting. We're discussing that. I'd support 2. I'm not against 1. I'm clearly now against 3. So I think that the amended motion would be a 2-year sunset on this use variance. Other discussion? Seeing none, I assume you're ready to vote on this, on BOA 21-0043 as conditioned by staff and with the additional amended condition for a 2-year sunset.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. And before I call the roll, what I've done is I've added a new sentence at the end of existing condition number 1 that reads, the use variance for inpatient services shall expire in 2 years, period. Okay. Ms. Baker.
Did we move in second?
Did
we move in second?
Since there was no objection,
Okay.
I'm assuming that the amendment was read into the main motion.
Just check.
For the record, it seems like that's the case.
Second.
That's what I meant to happen because I didn't see any nods or winks.
Ms. Dawes.
Yes.
Mr. Claybrook.
Yes.
Ms. Gerlach.
Yes.
Mr. Malazar?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Madam Vice Chair?
Yes, I find that the standards of 9.22.6 of the UDC are being met and will not be unduly detrimental to the properties in the vicinity.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
That's 8 ayes.
All right, you have been approved. We will hopefully not see you again in 2 years. Mr. Whitehead, will you call the next case for us?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. That brings us to agenda item number 6, which is docket BOA 2021-47, located at 263 North Hollywood. The applicant is We Remodel LLC, represented by Mr. Vatter. The use district is the R6 district, and there is a variance from 361A to allow reduced side yard setbacks and 452C1B to allow parking within the required front yard.
Okay, I assume this is a rejection. I don't think there was any, there wasn't any opposition, but the applicant is with us. So, Mr. Bacchus, can you call this case for us, or not call it, I'm sorry, present it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Bacchus again with the Division of Planning and Development. This application is for a vacant lot at the west side of North Hollywood Street at 263 North Hollywood Street. And the variances are read as read in the staff report and as read by Mr. Whitehead to allow a reduced side yard setback and to not allow parking in the required front yard. Next slide, please. The planning area is just east of the Overton Park and in the old Binghampton area, neighborhood. This area is just east of the Parkway. Next slide, please. Zoning map reveals it is a lot in the R6 district. It is surrounded by, next slide, single-family homes and duplexes as well that are legal non-conforming. And this lot is directly adjacent to, as you can see on the screen, single-family homes. And to the south, there are 2 vacant lots in R6 district zoning. Next slide. The site plan shows us a 30-foot front yard setback and also a concrete drive in the front yard within that required setback. Of course, the setbacks will be determined by our residential compatibility infill standards as well as the infill standards for single-family homes. The front yard setback, as I stated, is 30 feet. There are 3.5-foot side yard setbacks on the north and south line with a 20-foot rear yard setback. Next slide, please. The front elevation of the home shows a front-loaded garage and also a balcony above on the second story, leading out to a upper story bedroom leading out to an upper story balcony. That's covered by that's a covered garage, front porch for the garage. The front-loaded garages are not typical in this neighborhood. We much rather prefer that the garages be set back from the front facade or the front plane of the home, and I'll explain that to you in later. Next slide, please. So we reviewed the application in accordance with the zoning code regarding the variances, and the applicant has submitted a site plan to request the variances for a reduced side yard and to allow parking in the front yard. Now, the lot does not appear to be encumbered by any easements. Our public records reveal the adjacent lot to the south and the requested lot remain in separate in individual ownership from adjoining properties since 1977 and continuously since March 1st, 1989, which renders this lot legal nonconforming. The lot is legal nonconforming, and a conventional home does not meet Section 391 for garage and carport placement. Front-loaded garage cannot be supported with parking in the front within the front yard setback. A practical difficulty does exist in the exceptional narrowness, including extraordinary and exceptional situational condition of a legal nonconforming lot. However, the variances for the placement, for the garage placement, flush with the front wall plane and the front yard parking cannot be supported because there are alternate means of garage placement that would be more compatible with adjacent homes in the old Binghampton area. Next slide. So in accordance with findings of fact pursuant to section 922.6, the findings of fact have not been met, but the lot does exhibit unusual characteristics of being exceptionally narrow, including the extraordinary exceptional situation being a legal non-conforming lot. We're recommending, the staff is recommending rejection. However, if you choose to approve this application, our conditions are listed on page 9 of the staff report, and they're also on our next slide. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have. We've not received any letters or emails in opposition, but I did receive a phone call from the adjacent lot owner to the north, and she was not in support of the side yard setback.
I have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Bacchus.
Yes, ma'am.
Didn't we have a similar home maybe a year or so ago? A young fella was building on Hollywood. Is it the same person? Or is it a different person?
I don't know, sir. I mean, no, ma'am. I don't think it's a different person.
Okay. And we did not, did we approve that one? I think we approved it because it was unusual. Like there was just no way for him to re-justify that, right?
I don't recall what the outcome was.
We approved it. I feel like we talked about there was no way for him to re-justify the home.
We pushed his garage back.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, that's the big issue here is the garage is right on the front.
Right.
Where he actually pulled it back and brought the front door out.
Yeah.
To give it some depth.
Yeah.
To do that. I remember.
That's exactly what we were referring to, yeah.
Yeah. And so what would be the alternative in this case? Would it be like a parking pad or what's the alternative to the front-facing garage?
Well,
what makes sense?
Yes, without getting into redesign, that's an alternative. And
you
could provide a one-car garage. It would significantly modify his home, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But you could provide a one-car carport, perhaps, or a one-car garage set back beyond the wall plane, front wall plane. Those are alternatives that we can discuss with the applicant. And we have not had that opportunity to discuss those alternatives with him.
Okay. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Did I interrupt?
No, go ahead.
Okay. May I speak to this? I remember the case, and it's a little different from this one as I remember it. And yeah, we did make some changes in the design of the house. But this lot is wider too. And so to me, it's not unusual these days to have a 20 or a 21 foot wide building. That's 2 stories. And so that would allow him to get a driveway in the traditional location where it is all up and down that street. And just not have, and remember Hollywood, I drove over here. I mean, backing into Hollywood like that is rough. And so that would, well, we kind of jumped the gun on this thing, but to me, I'm fine with giving him a variance on that other side to where he can have just 3 feet, and that gives him enough room to get a usable width building and a driveway. There's a whole lot of backyard. It's real deep. That's it.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the other case too. I don't remember it being a 2-car wide garage either. It was a 1-car garage.
That's it. It was a more narrow. It was a more narrow lot too. It might have even been 25 feet wide. I think it was.
So, all right. Why don't we hear from the applicant unless we have other questions for Mr. Bacchus? Mr. Pence, is Mr. Vatter with us?
There's a Robert Burns on the line.
Robert Byrne?
Yes, sir. I'm on the line.
Yeah. Could you give your name and address for the record for me?
My name is Robert Burns. I'm at 553 Lee Street, Memphis, Tennessee, 38105.
All right. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Show up, you guy?
I do.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Pretty much first start off safety. a lot of people these days want garages, so that's why I included a garage in this bill. I know the lot is kind of small and long and narrow. Time consuming going straight to the back of the house. And tried to bring something new to the city. You know, a lot of houses look traditional, all of them down the street. You know, you go to Nashville and certain location and Las Vegas and things like that. Kind of figured that, you know, Memphis needed something, a newer look, you know, for the younger generation and people around, you know, a better look, a newer look. And that's why I chose to use this plan. And I was hoping that you all would accept it due to the fact that I know it's different and I know it's not what we are used to. And I figured, like, you know, a little change could help, you know. And like I said, number one thing about anything when you're doing it is safety. So a lot of people feel a lot safer, you know, with a garage. And normally your homes in the area with garages are double car garages, and normally your family has a man, you know, you have two drivers, at least two. So they would like to park in that garage. So that's why I pretty much chose this plan. That's all I have to say.
Are there any questions for Mr. Burns? All right, thank you, sir.
Well,
and again, Mr. Pence, there's no opposition, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Are there any questions? Well, any questions of staff before we move to discussion? So I think we need to get a motion on the floor to approve BOA 21-0047 as conditioned by staff.
So moved. Second.
All right, being moved and seconded. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, is there, I don't know if the applicant would hold it, but it sounds like he could work with staff, come up with some options that might fit the street better and work with everybody. I don't know where he is on his plans other than these elevations we're seeing, but.
Would it be best, Mr. Whitehead, if I'm reading the room, probably not going to get approval today, to go ahead and do a hold where he could speak to staff and maybe bring back something better, as opposed to denying it and having him to go through a different process to, if he needs a variance on something else? Would that make the most sense? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, because number one, he will probably need some sort of side yard setback variance under any scenario. And number two, even if we can massage the front elevation, he may still technically need some kind of variance from the contextual infill standards. We could probably get it better, that less incongruent with the contextual infill standards than it is now, but it probably still would require a variance there. So probably the best thing to do is hold this. We can hold for a month with or without the consent of the applicant. So it's
okay. So I would then make a motion to hold this case for 1 month so the applicant can maybe rework his plans and work with Mr. Baucus or other staff members to maybe come up with something a little more palatable. And is there a second for that motion?
Second.
And so that motion takes over from the prior motion. So unless there's discussion of the hold, which I don't see, I assume you're ready to vote on the hold. So we'll do that by voice. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. So Mr. Burns, so just to explain, I think I could feel that we weren't going to get anywhere with you today, or not with you, but for you on this deal. So what I'd suggest you do is maybe speak with Brian and maybe come up with some different ways of maybe adjusting this that maybe doesn't involve a two-car garage right on the very front of the house is kind of the big issue. And then I think you'll still probably need some variances, and I don't want to kind of shut you down at this meeting where you're having to do a re-thing. So instead of giving a full negative, hopefully we can see you next month and maybe come up with something that we can deal with. So with that, Mr. Whitehead, will you call the next case?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. That brings us to agenda item number 10, which is docket BOA 2021-52, located at 565 Leith Street. The applicant is Roadhouse Properties, LLC, represented by Chuch Pickard. The use district is the RU3 multifamily district, and the request is a variance from subsection 453B to allow no parking for this existing 4-unit structure.
Okay, Mr. Pentis, is the applicant on the call with us?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And there's no opposition, correct?
There is one individual in opposition who is out.
Okay, and they're on the line too. Okay. Mr. Bacchus, will you give us a staff report on this one, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Brian Bacchus with the Division of Planning and Development. Application is on 565 Leaf Street in the downtown uptown area. The applicant is requesting a variance to subsection 453B to not allow required parking for a 4-unit apartment building, the existing apartment building that's a 2-story in height. The planning area of the area, next slide please. The planning area is just east of uptown area, primarily in the old North Winchester Park, just north of Winchester Park neighborhood, and just east of the uptown neighborhood. The next slide shows the zoning map. This is just outside the boundary, as I stated, of the uptown area. This is in the residential urban 3 district, which allows apartments by right in the RU3 district. Next slide, please. As you can see by the land use map, the subject property is multifamily, as the adjacent property, which is an identical structure of a 4-unit apartment building. And you have other institutional uses, and more importantly, you have vacant lots in the area that are candidates for single-family residential and or multifamily. Next slide, please. The site plan shows the existing 565 structure to the north side. These are 2 identical buildings that are on the west side of Leaf Street. The subject property, as you can see, it has a rear alley to the rear and also street frontage on Leaf Street. Next slide, please. The front elevation, these are existing. This is a current photo, was taken last week. This is the subject property. As you can see, it's a 2-story with a front stoop, as well as a stairway door and also unit doors on the first floor. The other unit doors are on the side or either rear. This structure is, as I stated earlier, it was built in the early 1900s, and it is currently in existing zoning that permits the use. The applicant was issued a stop work order on this on the construction of the interior of the building. Next slide. The on-street parking, as you can see by the graphic, the total frontage from the north line of this structure to the south line of a vacant lot to the south is approximately 160 feet. So your parallel parking space, on-street parking spaces are typically 20 feet. You can get 8 parking spaces along the front, which would accommodate both structures. However, we feel the vacant lot, there are a vacant lot that's adjacent to the south property would develop at some point with either multifamily or single family, which reduces and limits the on-street parking. The next slide is a site photo, a couple site photos that show the subject property, which is at or about the road closure, road construction, road work ahead sign. The wrought iron fencing is on the adjacent property, the neighborhood Christian Center. And the front of the property, this is a view, just kind of gives you an idea of what the frontage of this property is today. There's no parking on this side of the utility pole, but from the utility pole to North Parkway, there's on-street parking on both sides of the street. The lower right-hand corner, it shows you the public alley. This is the public alley that runs north. It's an unimproved alley. However, there's minimal pavement along the off of North Parkway, as you can see, where this abandoned car is. I believe the car belongs to the property to the west, but it's parked in the alley. And as you can see, the alley is unimproved with mature trees along both sides of the alley. Next slide. In conclusion, the applicant submitted a site plan to show the location of the structure and the adjacent apartment building with front and side yard setbacks. to not allow required parking on site, but to allow required parking along the front of the lot along Leaf Street, which is required, it's a given. You can have on-street parking. The apartment building and the adjacent apartment building has no private drive from the front or from the rear, but the subject property can comply with the access management and minimum parking ratios for the zoning code. A practical difficulty does not exist in an extraordinary exceptional situation or condition found to apply because the property can meet the zoning code, providing on-site parking via a private drive or an access from the public alley, which is not an undue hardship upon the owner. The site plan can conform to the access and circulation regulations of the zoning code, like other properties in the uptown neighborhood. Therefore, the variance is not warranted to not allow required parking for a 4-unit apartment building. Next slide. The findings of facts have not been met, and the lot does not exhibit an exceptional physical feature or an extraordinary or an exceptional situation or condition that would render the nonconformity. The findings of fact. The Division of Planning and Development is recommending rejection of the application, but if you feel you should approve this application, conditions are listed on page 11, and they're also listed on our next slide. We did receive 2 opposition letters. I think the stack was on this end of the counter. You do have, I think, some of you do have the opposition letters. Neighborhood Christian Center wrote a letter of opposition, and also Miss Joanne Ballard, who is a neighborhood representative of the area. She also had some discussions with the applicant or the contractor, I'm not sure which, but they were concerned about the use of the property, and that was no longer an issue for our division. We've come to that conclusion that it was built as a 4-unit building, and it's continued as a 4-unit structure. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and hopefully you've seen the opposition letters, and I believe Mr. Ware is also on the line in opposition to the application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions of Mr. Bacchus at this time?
Yes. Mr. Bacchus, how many parking spots would they be required to have?
4. One bedroom.
Per unit?
No, 1 per unit.
It's a 4 per building.
That's correct.
So both properties would be 8 total?
That's correct.
Okay.
But we're only talking about one structure.
Okay, thank you.
That was my first question. The second, just to repeat, I think what you said earlier, the alternative, they do have the opportunity to build parking in the back of the building?
Yes.
Is the private drive the same as that alley, unfinished alley?
No.
Okay. They would have to build the drive?
That's correct.
Okay.
Between the 2 buildings, which would accommodate both.
Both of them?
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay.
The adjacent property owner would have to go along with it, and we have not heard from the adjacent property owner. Mm-hmm. And I believe it's owned by a ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me clarify that for a moment. Unfortunately, this city has never really maintained its alleys very well. And I think part of that goes to the fact that we never faced our garages to our alleys, so there's no need to maintain it because no one ever went down there except for maybe the garage, the garbage trucks. However, you'll see, especially in, maybe Central Gardens and Evergreen, if you're a corner house or maybe 2 houses down from the corner, you can pave, as long as you have some kind of agreement or some kind of go-ahead from the city in some kind of form or fashion. This body could be that granting authority. You can pave so long as you're completely within the right-of-way from your house to the side street. So that's that's the kind of condition, that's where the condition is coming from in our report, that what we would have the applicant do is stay completely within that right-of-way for that alley, and then he or she would not need anybody's approval other than this body and maybe a note to the city engineer that this is happening. So that's where our condition is coming from. And I think that's going to be the point of contention with the applicant in a moment.
And one other point of information, we did have communications with the traffic engineer, and they were kind of 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, but they just mentioned that it's 150 feet from North Parkway to this property line. And my understanding is that they had no issue with trying for the applicant to pave the alley. However, I'm not sure how the applicant gets the city to do the paving. I'm not sure if they even do that. That's a good question for the.
I know the answer to that. It would be the applicant's alley forevermore. To maintain at least.
I have a question, a couple questions. The first one is, how wide is this alley?
About 10 to 12 feet.
10 or 12.
That's narrow.
Yeah.
It's one way.
And my second question is this, of course, that's a huge expense, paving an alley. Could it be gravel or anything like that? Would it have to be pavement?
If this body, so the UDC says that gravel can be approved on a case-by-case basis by the zoning administrator. So if this body added that as a condition specifically, then the answer is yes.
Okay.
So just so I'm clear on this, parking's allowed in the back. Like, I just want to know what the variance is. We're still having to do a variance, even if it's to use the alley that they sort of by right can use, because they need a variance to be able to have the ability to make an improvement on it. Is that what you were saying?
Well, the way we've written these conditions is basically, if you approve this as conditions, you would not be approving the variance.
That's okay. That's kind of what I was understanding, and so that's why I was having a little. Okay.
And his point of clarification, his request is to not have required parking.
Correct. He just wants on-street parking.
That's correct.
Yeah. So even if we use these conditions, we're giving what he's sort of allowed to do by the UDC. Okay.
That's correct.
I just wanted to make sure that, that makes sense to me. I just want to make sure I was on the same page. Any other questions before we move on to the applicant? All right, Mr. Pentis, is Mr. Pickard on the line?
I'm here.
Could you give your full name and address for the record for us, please?
Chooch Pickard, Architecture Incorporated, 109 North Main Street, Suite 200, Memphis.
Okay, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Well, first, thank you for hearing this case. I'd like to start off about how we got here. My client purchased this property on January 7th of this year with the intent of fixing up the property and adding to the neighborhood revitalization that's happening over there. He was under the impression, because a lot of contractors go in and renovate these apartments, that all they needed to do was pull a mechanical, electrical, and plumbing permit. And that is the case if you try to get around some of the loopholes that the International Building Code and International Existing Building Code allow. He could have gone in and renovated one of these apartments at a time and not pull the building permit. He could have trenched new electrical in and where plumbing is and not pull the building permit. But what he chose to do was to do the renovation correctly and tear all the drywall out on the inside of the building. So when they called to get a inspection on the electrical, they put a stop work order on it because they didn't actually have a building permit, which again is not always required in these cases, but because they tore all the drywall out, they did. So a plans reviewer actually told us that we needed the parking for this, or they would not give us a building permit. The plans reviewer, I don't believe, has the authority to determine whether or not we meet the criteria in section 10.2 as a legal non-conforming status. And I have tried to have conversations with staff. I actually had a great conversation in the beginning with another planner who thought this was no problem to get approved, and we thought everything was going to be great, because I do believe we have legal non-conforming status. There was an occupant in the building until January 7th, so we've gone less than 365 days. This building has never had on-site parking since 1953 when it was built. So I feel like we shouldn't even be here today, and that we should be allowed to park it just the way it always was. That was my client's intention when he bought the property, that he had no idea that this would be an issue. He actually would love to develop the back part of the property in the future, but he can't get control of the identical structure to the south. And so, you know, as part of that, I'd like to say I take exception to conclusion number 3, that says that we can have a private drive. We just can't. There's 6 feet between the concrete stoop on our building and the property line. The city does not have the authority to go in and force or force us to get an easement with that other property owner who is not willing to work with us anyway. The other issue is this 10-foot alley. What wasn't mentioned is it's a dead-end alley. Back in 2002, the Neighborhood Christian Center closed their end of the block, and so that basically has caused this alley to become not maintained over the years, with broken down cars in it. So the city hasn't maintained it. It is only 10 feet wide, and as Mr. Bacchus mentioned, we're 150 feet up from North Parkway. So that would cause people to back out. If 2 cars were coming in different directions, that would cause people to have to back onto North Parkway. It's just not reasonable. If it was a wide enough alley for 2-way, that'd be fine. Or if the alley went all the way through and it could be a 1-way alley, that'd be fine. So again, I don't think that, I think we do meet all of the finding of facts if we were to get a variance, but I think the planning director could just rule that we're legal non-conforming and we just move on. In addition to that, there are 3 parking spaces legally in front of our building. We have 50.33 feet. If you divide that by the 19.5 feet, that gives us 2.53 spaces. And if you round up from that, if you are on the higher side of the half space. In addition to that, directly across the street is city-owned property that will never be developed. There is parking on both sides of the street. There are 2 duplexes that face North Parkway that are, the side of that lot is on Leith. There is open parking all the way across there that is legal. And then to the north of there is this city lot that has MLGW equipment on it that'll never be removed. So there are, I did not count on that side because we've already got the 3 right in front of us. And so I guess technically I could throw a bike rack in and we get our 4 spots. So I'm really not sure why we're even here today. I've tried to express that to staff that I wanted to discuss whether or not this even needed to come in, and we just got rejected instead of a discussion about what the real issues were. So happy to answer any other questions you have.
Are there any questions for the applicant? Do you have a question for staff real quick? Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
What's the distance between the 2 buildings? Between the 2 buildings?
There are concrete stoops outside of each one of the buildings that are a second exit out of the apartments, and the distance between those is 12 feet 6 inches, something like that. Maybe. Anyway, it's only 12 feet, so we only get 6 of those feet. So it is impossible to put a private drive coming from Leith to legally put one in there.
Understood.
I have a question, and I don't know if this is for the applicant and or staff, but if I recall, the standard driveway is what, 10 feet for a standard driveway? Is that correct?
It's typically 12.
12
but
feet.
in
Is it 12?
older areas, we have been recommending 10.
So, well, I mean, it is possible if the other building owner, if we could reach them, agrees to a shared driveway. That makes it a possibility? Does that make that a possibility if they would agree to it?
It does, but we don't have the ability to make that happen. The other property owner is not willing to sell or give an easement or do anything with that. And I don't, you know, there's no way to force them into that. And I will say also, the alley is 10 feet wide in the back, by the way. So it's also extremely narrow for an alley that is dead end and one way.
Mm-hmm. And so typically, the reason why the variance piece came up is that typically the parking is a 1-to-1 ratio. It is 1 spot per unit. So that's why you're here about the variance. And we also can discuss it here about how to make it work. Our board is pretty flexible, and we try to make all parties happy. You know, all parties happy. Nobody will ever be 100% happy, but content, perhaps. So we are here to discuss how to make that work versus just street parking, because the rule is a 1-to-1 ratio
For new construction.
But it's for all. It's just new construction.
It's legal non-conforming. It's not new construction.
Is it just new construction, or does that apply to other stuff?
I'd like to hear from Mr. Whitehead.
I don't know.
Legal non-conforming status per section 10.2.
Well, I guess there's at least 2 items that makes this site not meet the current regulations. Now, I'm going to get to the point of whether the current regulations apply to this site in a moment, but at least in 2 instances, it doesn't have the 10,000 square foot acreage that it ought to, and it doesn't have the parking that it ought to. Now, to determine whether you're protected under 10.2, which is the non-conforming structure use status part of the code, is, were you legal in 1953? And that is a question that we would have to do some research if we have not already done the research that did we require that level of acreage for apartment buildings in whatever the precursor zoning district was, A, and then B, did we require off-street parking?
Mm-hmm.
So part of me says that there's a good likelihood that this is improperly before you. But since we're here, let's see if we can work something out, because I would hate to make that comment and then go to the 1953 code and realize, oops, we did need to do something. The other aspect, and we have sworn testimony from Mr. Pickard, is that, so could you have a site this size, and then did you have to have parking? Let's assume that those questions are answered. Then the next question is, well, was this property completely vacant? Because once you're completely vacant for 365 days, you lose all those protections anyway. We have sworn testimony from Mr. Pickard that it has not gone that long. So that question has been answered. So, I mean, we're at a point where we could make this go away, but let's see where the board is in the next few minutes after we go to Mr. Ware in opposition before we do anything rash.
I've got it. I think that was my question on what made it non-conforming. Because I think my other question goes to, what was it prior? Was it a 4-apartment unit before, or was it a duplex?
Mr. Pickard is nodding his head, but also this is kind of a prototypical mid-century quadplex. I mean, no offense, but whoever architect designed these, he was very busy.
Right? Okay, so we're still determining the nonconformity piece, I guess, and hoping that we come up with something that we don't have to do the research. Thank you.
Okay. And if this body is really stuck on this does need a variance, and we would like to do some of these more expensive conditions, then what I would suggest is let's roll it to the heel of the agenda. I'm going to go downstairs and find the 49 is probably the the code in effect at the time and to see what it says about acreage and parking. But that's only if we go down that path.
Well, I think, to Mr. Pritchard, I hope I'm saying his name, Pickard, excuse me. I think, because his argument was that we shouldn't be here because it should be non-conforming. So I think just to either solidify his argument or even to solidify our decision, if he's arguing that it should be or it is non-conforming, we confirm that. That's just me, so that we can make sure we're making the proper decision.
Right, and I think it's pretty well established that his client did not go the 365 days. He should be protected, but only if, it's been several years, but if y'all remember in like 2010 or 2011, we had a payday lender before us on Austin P Highway. And yes, he was non-conforming because he predated the latest, but he never got a certificate of occupancy. So he was never legal in the first place. So that's the one question that we need to find out.
Okay.
If we're leaning towards onerous, saying no, I should say, or saying yes with conditions.
Let me ask a quick question of staff, just so I can keep it right in my head. What parking is required? We need one per unit, but the street counts. So his 2.5 or so would have counted. We can't count across the street, but he's saying, hey, it's an empty lot.
So you would need 2 off-street parking.
Gotcha, okay.
Could you clarify, Mr. Whitehead, I'd have to find the exact section. In the parking section, it talks about in the reductions for on-street parking that if you have more than half of a space in front of one property, it counts towards that property. So we have 2.58 spaces. I will also say we are within 660 feet of a bus stop. So we would also be able to have a reduction of 10% also. So where all this adds up, and again, I'd be amenable to adding a bike rack that holds 5 bikes and you get rid of another spot needed. So I think we meet it by adding a bike rack, honestly. And again, we're happy to do that. I don't think we should be here, but I'm fine with saying that, well, it may or may not be legal non-conforming. If we are not conforming and it's not legal because of whatever zoning was in place previously, I still think we don't need a variance if we use the 3 on-street parking and a bike rack. Again, we're only here because a plans reviewer told us we needed to be here. And there's a difference in the building code in what triggers permits compared to the UDC. There's a big gray area there. Someone could buy up the building next door and renovate each one of those apartments individually, and you guys would never see him because nothing would trigger having to come before this board and do any on-street parking. It's been this exact way since 1953.
Okay. Well, if it's okay, that makes sense to me. Let's move to the opposition real quick and talk to them, and then we'll come back and discuss a little bit more. We started discussing stuff when you had about 4 minutes left, so that's going to reserve 6 minutes of time if we need it. So, Mr. Pentis, could you get the opposition on the line for us?
Yes, Harold Ware.
Mr.
Yes.
Blair, are you with us?
No, it's Ware. It's W-A-R-E.
Blair, okay, I'm sorry. Can you give your name and address for the record?
Yes, I'm Harold Ware. I'm with Neighborhood Christian Centers at 785 Jackson Avenue. And we own the property both on the north side and the south side of this subject property.
Okay, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, go ahead and speak with us.
Well, if anyone has driven down Leith Street, you can understand the problem of the parking. I mean, there are cars all up and down Leith Street, and in many times we have to stop to let other cars get by before you can even travel down the street. We're certainly not opposed to the use of this property, but I think if you allow street parking for this unit, and then right next door you're going to have another 4 apartments, and you allow street parking for them. We'll have cars all over the place, and we'll never be able to get down Leith Street. I think it also imposes a safety risk. I don't think a fire truck could even get down the street when you have street parking. Many times the occupants of those buildings put up basketball goals out in the street where they're playing basketball in the street, and that's a dangerous situation when cars are coming through. Also, Leith Street is a cut-through street between Jackson Avenue and North Parkway. So cars are coming down Leith Street all the time at high speeds. And if you're parking, if you allow more parking on the street, it's going to create another safety risk. I think the fact that the alley exists on the backside, and if the alley could be improved, would make parking accessible to all those properties. I mean, like I said, we own the property. We own the property also at 557 Leith, which is on the north side of this existing property. We don't have any plans to develop it. We would be willing to sell it if we had the right purchaser in mind. But if that property develops, you've also got another issue with parking on Leith. So I think that the ideal situation is to develop the alley on the backside and give everybody access to parking off North Parkway. That's really all I have to offer right now.
Okay, so just so I understand, which property do you own to the south of this? The building or the empty lots on the corner?
We own the empty lot at 557 Leith.
Okay.
And we also then we own the property all the way to Jackson Avenue on the north side, which is the main office of Neighborhood Christian Centers.
But 557 Leith, that's empty. That's not the other quadplex, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's a vacant lot.
Gotcha. Just wanted to make sure.
And even right now, there's a car parked on our lot with flat tires. That's evidently one of the occupants in the building between us, which we've sent notice is trying to get them to remove the car, but they haven't removed it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in many times there are cars sitting on the street with flat tires. We've had cars parked in front of the unit that's between the one they're talking about. But I mean, parking is just an issue.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Ware?
Mr. Chairman, yes.
Go ahead.
Mr. Ware, I think I need to correct you on one thing, and maybe I don't. Staff may tell me I'm wrong, but you were saying that the development of the alley would be the key to providing access to all the properties, but I don't think that's correct with the alley only not being big enough for two-way traffic. That would not solve the issue of being able to get access, egress, and ingress to the back of those two buildings.
I mean, I've seen many one-way alleys in this city, so I don't know.
So once you got them in, how would you get them out?
Well, when I say one way, I mean one car at a time could come in or out.
Oh, all right. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions for Mr. Ware? All right, hearing none. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
And there's no other opposition, correct, Jeffrey?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Pickard, we're back to you. We got 6 minutes. You've already. Yeah, go ahead.
We're 150 feet up the alley. This isn't one or two houses in, as Mr. Whitehead had mentioned that some people do in Central Gardens or in Evergreen. North Parkway is an incredibly busy street. I would not want to have to back out onto that in that location. The only reason that alley can't be used as a one-way alley is because the Neighborhood Christian Centers had it closed on the north end. So that's actually what's hindering our ability. And frankly, if you pave this alley, one of the things that staff had mentioned to me was that everybody that backs up to it would have access to it. Well, once you pave this alley, now you end up having about 6 parcels access this from the rear of Manassas and the other Mr. Ware's other property if it were developed and the other one in between us. As far as fire trucks down the street, city engineering has approved parking on both sides. Those streets are wider than what's in Cooper Young, where there's two-way traffic. As far as flat tires on cars, we're renovating this building so that we can raise the bar of the renters on this street. I don't expect somebody that's going to be able to pay the rent in this unit to have a car with flat tires out front sitting there for months. But also that's not on my client. If there's an issue with that, somebody can call 311 and have the city take care of it. That has nothing to do with on-street parking. And again, we're not changing anything that's been there since 1952. We're not increasing parking on the street at all because it's the status quo is all we're asking for. And I'm willing to actually reduce it by putting in a bike rack.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Pickard?
The owner is also on the line if anyone has questions for him. Mr. Brian Weed is on the call.
Okay, Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't have any questions for Mr. Pickard, but I do have questions for Mr. Whitehead.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Whitehead, you years of experience. Tell us how we get this to work.
I think we add a bike rack.
No.
So we take our conditions. Without knowing the 1949 zoning code off the top of my head, I would venture to say that there were probably certain multifamily zoning districts that did not require off-street parking. Just because at that time, you still had a lot of people riding mass transit. So I bet, without going downstairs and going to the book, that this probably is more of an appeal than a variance. An appeal of the plans review that sent Mr. Pickard to you. But here we are, so what we could do is, I guess, take strike conditions 1 and 2 and basically require the final site plan, including the location of a bike rack, be subject to review and approval, et cetera. So keep the rest of condition 3, but just add that the final site plan down to the bike rack. Bike racks, I think, naturally can accommodate at least 2 bike spaces. And I think Mr. Pickard's math was probably right. We're at 2.85 spaces on the street, which leaves 1.15 required. The parking reduction table says if you're close to a bus line, you get 10%. If you have a sidewalk, you get 5. It's like being at Macy's, you get all these little percentages off. And then after all that, it says you can take one off for a bike rack. So even if the 1949 zoning code requires, even if this building does not meet the 1949 zoning code, we add a bike rack and we're good.
Good. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we accept Mr. Whitehead's summary of what we need to do.
Second that.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree. Is there any other comment, and then we'll get the motion on the floor?
May I make a comment on it? And I'm totally ready to support it, but it troubles me a little bit that we're saddling this property with a variance when it seems to me like he's allowed to do what he wants to do without a variance. That's the only point I'm making. But I'm willing to vote for it because...
I don't like unnecessary variances either. Like, I'm kind of with you. I was wondering about that. If he can already do it, do we really need to rule on anything other than we're really changing it to the appeal you mentioned, sorry.
Well, remember, our property owner here is probably, maybe, a non-conformity. What this variance will do is take him out of that and bless him, bring him back to legitimacy. Because this variance would say, okay, he's better than a nonconformity.
So he'll now be just conforming.
His insurance company is very happy that we're doing this, right? Because we're bringing him out of nonconformity land.
Okay, you just, rang the bell for me. You know, sometimes you actually have people bring things in because their insurance won't cover it.
We have to do next month.
Yeah.
Okay, so question are we good to vote now on the motion that, Mr. Jackson gave? We don't have to do any other special language. He's made the motion.
Right.
Okay.
And that language is reflecting a bike rack between the words plan and shall in the only remaining condition.
Very good. Is there any other discussion before we vote? Seeing none, Mr. Whitehead, will you give us a roll call, please?
Ms. Dawes?
Yes.
Ms. Savage-Jones?
Yes, I find that standards of 9.22.6 of the UDC are being met and will not be unduly detrimental to the properties in the vicinity.
Mr. Melasry?
Yes.
Ms. Baker?
Yes.
Ms. Scarlett?
Yes.
Mr. Claybrook?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
8 ayes.
All right, thank you much, sir. You've been approved. Mr. Whitehead, will you call our last case for us?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. That brings us to agenda item number 11, which is docket BOA 2021-53, located at 3514 Winhoma. The applicant is DB Ventures LLC, represented by Barry Jones. The use district is EMP Employment, and the request is a use variance from 252 to allow a boarding house.
Okay, and we have multiple opposition on this one, I believe, Mr. Fenton?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and give us your staff report, and then we'll get to that.
Yeah, so this is BOA 2153, which is a use variance request from section 2.5.2 to allow a boarding house. Next slide, please. This is located in the Oakville neighborhood, and you can see the subject property highlighted in yellow there. The large intersection to the west is Tullahoma and Winchester. Next slide, please. So you can see the zoning map. This area is zoned employment, so for light industrial uses. And that's on the land use map. We can see they're mainly light industrial uses. There are some commercial uses in the area. And then the airport is immediately on the west side of Tullahoma. Next slide, please. These are just some site photos of the subject property, and the second photo on the right is across the street from the subject property. Next slide, please. And these are just photos looking north and south down Winchester from the subject property. Next slide, please. So this is the site plan. It's essentially just the existing building and then parking. Next slide, please. So Memphis 3.0 found that this was not consistent, essentially because they had this area as anchor neighborhood, primarily single unit. However, note that the Tennessee Code annotated states that variance requests may be inconsistent with a community's long-range general plan. Next slide, please. So essentially, the applicant has stated that their intended target market is pilots, given the proximity of the site to the Memphis International Airport, and staff found the granting of this variance will not cause substantial detriment to the public good, nor will it substantially impair the intent and purpose of an adopted plan or code, nor will it be injurious to the neighborhood or general welfare, and it will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of the development code. And at the conclusion of the staff report, staff had received no letters in opposition, but since then several individuals have signed up to speak in opposition. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Penzis. Is there any questions for staff before we move on?
I do have a quick question. You did mention that the audience that they're trying to appeal to are pilots. Is that right?
Sorry, what did you?
I was asking, in your report, you mentioned something about pilots. Is that the?
Oh, the applicant said their intended target market is pilots, which is why they want a boarding house, because short-term stays.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I know a lot of pilots that will own a house and they have guys just rotating through as they're coming in with FedEx. That they'll have like two guys staying in the house, and then, 7 or 8, and they're just going in and out. So there's a word for it. I can't think of what. Crash pad.
Okay.
It's a crash pad.
Okay, I kept saying boarding house, it really just didn't hit me. But
Yeah. Okay, are there any other questions of staff? All right, then is Mr. Jones with us, Mr. Pensis?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Would you give your name and address for the record for us?
Yes, S. Barry Jones, architect at 1503 Monroe Avenue, Memphis.
Okay, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, go ahead and speak with us, sir.
Well, I'm representing Mr. Dwight Boyd and the owner of the property. We met out there several months ago and walked the property. The property's been vacant for quite a number of years, and it's actually in amazingly good shape on the interior. It's a little, obviously it's dated. You saw the photographs. The area is pretty sparse as far as the buildings are. It's not dense at all. It's not a building. There is a building to the south that faces onto Winchester, but all the other buildings are really yards apart from I'd say maybe even over 100 yards away from this building. The area is it's obviously industrial, and it's high commercial, heavy intense storage, and mainly large warehouse type buildings, without a lot of activity probably at night, not assuming that they're day workers. But so we feel like the fact that Mr. Boyd wants to invest money in this area, which seems to be somewhat having it's hard to believe it's anything around the airport's having difficulties, but this building has been for rent for sale or lease, I believe, for years. So there's obviously not a whole lot of interest in this district for business activity. So Mr. Boyd bought the building, saw some potential with it for potentially housing folks that maybe are looking for something more reasonably priced. And of course, the goal here is to really clean the building up, high, level of landscaping, obviously do some things with the architecturally that'll bring it up to a, nicer look. And he's going to gate it. So it'll be secure. There'll be people in there, probably 24/7, in and out. So it's going to add some activity to the street. It's not, to call it a motel it's not a motel. These will be people who will have a long-term contract with Mr. Boyd to stay at this facility. So he'll know who they are. He will monitor. He's very conscious about the fact that he wants good, solid, citizens, if you will, to move into this facility. He doesn't want people lounging on the front porch and doing things that are unbecoming to the district. So his idea is really to run a very well managed facility for folks like pilots, and it may not be just pilots. I mean, Mr. Boyd is involved with the University of Memphis. You may remember his basketball career a few years ago, but he also sees the need for many of the, especially foreign students that are doing their grad work that just honestly don't have the funds to live in if you guys have checked the rental rates around the Memphis, Tennessee here recently, they're absolutely through the roof. So there's a real strong need for more affordable type situations. And that goes true for these pilots too. Some of these young guys, they're just getting started. They're coming in. They may not even, many of them don't live in Memphis. They just commute. And so they're here, and the boss tells us, hey, we're not going to need you till tomorrow. at 5 o'clock. Well, where do they go for, 12 hours or 24 hours, so they don't have anywhere to go. So these kind of places are really needed. I mean, obviously FedEx is a huge, part of our community, and, anything, I think we can do to support them is important. But, it's just some side benefits, if you will. I mean, it's to add people, there's going to be some outdoor areas where these guys aren't flying during the day much, so they can sit, relax on there's going to be a nice porches, some outdoor places where they can, maybe have a barbecue pit, that kind of thing. So, it's going to be more of a home type situation. It's not a motel, is what I'm trying to say. So be gated, well landscaped, and architecturally updated.
Are there any questions for Mr. Jones? I have one. So one of the conditions in the staff report is the number of tenants would be 10. I want to make sure, are we talking 10 total people, or are we talking 10 at any given time? Like, how would that work for your client? Like, how many, I know, an international student, of course, would need to be there for a semester, but, pilots are coming in every couple days. Are they rotating through the same room, or would somebody have their own space if they're renting it and they'd always have that area?
Well, the structure there would be no more than 10 in it at any one given time. That's number one. We understand that, and each room, if you will. I mean, I'm not, I had Mr. Boyd he's actually on the phone here with us. Perhaps he can answer the question, but I mean, let's say one pilot rents the room and his buddy calls him and says, "Hey, Bob, can I, use your room tonight?" I mean, that may very well be a possibility. We can't rule that out. As one gentleman said earlier, a lot of these guys do share their places, so that may be something that we'd have to manage with code, or some type of entry code security. I mean, security is going to be a high level. I mean, it's going to be it's not going to be, everything will be set so that nobody can come in that building that's not supposed to be there.
Okay. Other questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yeah, Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Jones, what is the square footage of that facility?
It's about a little over 3,000 square feet. No, I'm sorry. Wait, is that right?
That seems small. That seems real small.
I think the site plan on page 11 of the staff report shows it at 3,500.
Sorry. 3,500?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? So let's, I think what we're going to do, Mr. Jones, is move on to the opposition. You should have, let me go back to my, I think I had it pulled up. About 6 minutes plus your 2 minutes left to, 4 minutes, so a total of 6 minutes left to rebut. And we'll move on to opposition if that's okay with you.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. All right, Mr. Penzis, who do we have with us today?
Charles Welch Jr.
All right, Mr. Welch, can you hear us and we hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. I sure can. Can you give us your name and address for the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. My name is Charles Welch. I'm a partner in the law firm of Ferris Pabango. Our Memphis business address is 999 South Shady Grove Road, Suite 500.
Okay. In the past, Mr. Whitehead has acted like maybe I should swear everybody in. So I'm going to swear you in, even though you're an officer of the court, if that's okay with you, sir.
You swear me in?
I do. So, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the true stuff you got?
I do.
Okay, and we have a total of 10 minutes for all the opposition. Just wanted to lay that out there. And go ahead, sir.
Can I ask how many speakers there are? I know Mr. Proffer, Lynn Proffer speak. How many others are there?
There are 4 total on the line, including yourself and Mr. Proffer.
I need to be very brief then. We appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Thank you very much. Lynn and Fran Proffer own the property directly across the street from the subject property at 3485 Winchester Road, which houses the distribution operations of Topmost Chemical and Paper Company. The subject property, as you know, fronts on Winahoma Drive, which is a very short access road, 2-lane access road that allows access to Winchester on the south and with no access anywhere to dead ends on the north. The road is 2 lanes. And if you look on page 9 of the photos staff report, you can see that the topmost property, the Proffer property, is the view from the subject property looking west. Take a look at that. That's the loading dock for the distribution facility. And it's simple as this. Inject pedestrian and vehicular traffic incidental to a residential use into the middle of a distribution center, most likely it's going to create a serious safety hazard. We're talking about tractor trailer rigs and other large trucks running in constantly all day long, and I'm not sure how late in the evening, but it's a lot of traffic. And we're very, very empathetic with folks who want to bring affordable housing, know how necessary that is, but we don't want to create a safety hazard. Since we've got so many speakers, I think I'm going to defer to the next speaker. Maybe it would make sense for Mr. Proffer to talk next. We can talk about the character of the area and his business operations on the moment.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Welch? Hearing none, thank you, sir. Stay with us in case we need to come back to you. Mr. Pensis, who do we have next?
Lynn Proffer.
Lynn Proffer? Is Proffer with us?
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Go ahead.
Good.
You'll give your name and address for the record, Lynn.
Okay. I'm Lynn Proffer. I'm property owner at 3394 Winchester Road, zip code 38118.
Okay, I'm going to swear you in real quick. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, go ahead. We're down, just so you know on the time, we're at 7 minutes and 43 seconds.
Okay. Topmost Chemical and Paper has occupied their facility for the last 16 years. We are a high volume distribution facility. Our shipping and receiving docks face this 3514 Winahoma Drive proposed boarding facility. As you know, this street is zoned industrial. Businesses on this street are made up entirely of distribution and manufacturing. And due to the trucking commerce on this street daily by 18-wheelers, this proposed building facility would be both a hazard and a hindrance. Topmost has their receiving docks that face this proposed boarding facility. Our trucks daily receive 18-wheelers that back into our docks and do not need street space obstructed and additional traffic on the street. This is business here, like it is on the other people at the end of on the street. In addition, we have UPS, we have FedEx delivering and picking up. Topmost has their own fleet of delivery trucks to make deliveries and returning every afternoon to load up for the next day. The hazards and dangers of lodgers and renters would create unnecessary exposure to accidents or worse injuries on the street. Topmost annually pays to the city county property tax of $20,000 annually. We also pay additionally a city of Memphis business tax in 2020 of $15,000. We've been a good corporate citizen. We've been in business 43 years. And what type of volume of taxes is this boarding facility going to pay annually to Memphis Shelby County? I'm just curious. A statement was made by Mr. Jones, architect. There is a need for FedEx pilots to stay overnight. Well, gentlemen, let me tell you, there's some hotels in Nankana Park. There are also hotels right down on American Way. I know you're not aware of this, but this is a crime area. If you talk to the other businesses on Winhoma, what they've experienced, attempted break-ins, thefts, vagrants sleeping on the front of their premises, tires and rims taking off trucks. I really don't think Frederick Smith would recommend any of his highly skilled pilots to stay on this street. Why would they when professional hotel accommodations are located so close? The proposed variance is wrong, it's improper, and it should not be allowed. I'm asking each of you on the board here to reconsider withdrawing this proposed variance. And who are the other people going to stay in this facility? I know Mr. Jones said pretty much referenced FedEx pilots, but what if FedEx pilots don't stay here? Who else is going to stay here? And is it going to be students? Okay, if it's going to be students, are they going to be throwing frisbee out in the street, riding bicycles? I mean, I'm dead serious. This is a business street, and it's not designed for what they have proposed here. I'll close with that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Are there any questions for the opposition on this? Hearing none, thank you, sir. Mr. Penzis, who do we have next up?
Mr. Terry Ryan.
Mr. Ryan, all right, so you unmuted. Could you give your name and address for the record?
Sure. My name is Terry Ryan. We're at 3478 Winhoma, Memphis, Tennessee. We're three doors down from the proposed site.
Okay. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the true stuff you got?
I do.
All right, go ahead. We got 3 minutes and 46 seconds left.
Well, I can talk fast. I won't need all that.
Go for it.
I think we've heard a couple of things already that I had on my list, and that is safety factors. I appreciate you letting me talk for a minute. We are in a rather high crime area. We've had over 113 reported crimes in the area just since January 1st. And that is in less than 1 mile of our area. And our concern is really who is going to be in this property. Whether it be FedEx pilots, whether it's going to be grad assistants from the university, or are we actually going to have other in the area? It has been mentioned by Lynn regarding break-ins. We've had multiple break-ins here. We've had shootings in the area. Just this year, we've had 3 reports of murders just up on the corner. So it is a high crime area, and we're more concerned about the tenants that will be in there and how much more will we have. So that was my biggest concern, and our company's biggest concern is the safety of our employees. So that's pretty much what I had to say also.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Ryan? Hearing none, Mr. Penzis? You got one more?
Final speaker is Mr. Hayes Denny.
All right, Mr. Denny, if you'll give your name and address for the record so I can swear you in.
Hey, I'm Hayes Denny. I'm at 3488 Winhoma Drive, and I also own the property across the street, 3477 Winhoma Drive.
Okay, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the true self you got?
I do.
Okay, go ahead. You got just right at 2 minutes left.
Okay, good deal. Yeah, I just want to kind of second what Lynn and Terry said. I mean, we're an electrical contractor. We got trucks coming in here every single day. All of our employees coming in here every single day. And kind of to back on the crime, this cove in general has had a heavy traffic with crime. It's nothing to find a 9mm hollow point bullet sitting out in the cove or on top of your roof when you're cleaning the skylights or whatnot. There's been several break-ins. I know about 2-3 months ago, the Best Way tire facility right behind that backs up to my property in Paducah Rigging, they actually cut through Curtis Stout's fence and used it as a raceway to get in there and break into that warehouse and steal tires out of it. I've had several scrap bins stolen out of my facility with scrap wire and conduit in it. It's just not a safe area. I don't know if y'all are familiar with FedEx pilots, but I know the ones that I know, they wouldn't stay in this cove. I share the same concerns as every other individual that is in this cove and are here daily and that have been here for years. I mean, it's a very high traffic area, topmost obviously being the leader in that, but Paducah's got a lot of big trucks coming in here daily. I got a lot of big trucks with generators and so forth coming in every single day. So this cove is strictly business.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Denny? Hearing none, you took us down to 16 seconds, so good job. Are there any questions for any of the opposition before we move back to the applicant? Seeing none, so Mr. Jones, you have 6 minutes for your rebuttal.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have a lot of admiration for guys like that just spoke. There's a lot of businesses are hard to run, and it's really the lifeblood of our country and our economy, and God bless them. So I just feel like that, and Mr. Boyd feels like, I'm speaking for him, that the mix of use is not. I mean, I understand the traffic and I understand the gentleman's concerns. But these are guys. First of all, I wonder whether they'll even have cars. I mean, most of them are probably here. They're not. They may take a cab down there or taxi. So Uber. But there will be. The beauty of it is, and I mean, maybe some of these companies actually operate 24/7, but to me, some advantage might be in the fact that you do have some traffic coming in and out of there. Maybe eyes on the street are typically, it can be a good thing for crime. So, that's the positive I can think of. And I think just sometimes the mixing of uses is actually a positive thing for a district. So, and we're seeing that more and more with these malls putting in apartments above the stores and mixing retail and residential. So, that's a component that maybe should be taken into consideration by the board. And I hope that you guys will consider that.
Okay, are there any questions for Mr. Jones? Seeing none, I assume you guys are ready to. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Jones.
You bet.
Ready to discuss. Is there a motion to approve BOA 2021-0053 as conditioned by staff?
So moved. Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
When I look at this project, it just doesn't seem to fit. And to put 10 people in 3,500 square feet doesn't seem to fit the idea of anything other than a boarding house, to be honest with you, or a dormitory. And I just don't think it fits the area. Just that simple.
I agree with Mr. Jackson. I have a lot of concerns as far as safety, even if you're talking about housing your target group of pilots or whatever. I think we still wasn't clear on the actual occupants. I know that's the intended target, but that's not was not concrete. And the fact that we are dealing with a lot of industrial activity. To have someone to stay there or supposed to be getting rest as a pilot, I can't really see that in that type of high traffic of business. And so I just have a real concern with safety, and then just, the fact, like Mr. Jackson said, it doesn't fit. We're talking about some type of residential entity, doesn't fit the vicinity to me.
Quick question for you, Josh. Is there any place in town that a boarding house is allowed by right, or is it always a use variance?
Please hold. Let's see, boarding house. It requires a special use permit in our higher multifamily districts, a special use permit in our lowest commercial district. It's by right in in two of our commercial districts, and then a special use permit in our CBD. And then, that's 7 zoning districts. The other 12, it's not permitted.
Okay. My issue with it, I actually don't know. I mean, I care about safety. I don't really care about 10 additional cars to a place with this many trucks. Somebody was driving down there. I don't care. Right. They can use the street just like anybody else. And we may have a tremendous guy that's going to do a top-notch facility, but we've just allowed a boarding house. And so when it doesn't work, or 2 years from now when he's not around, we got a 10-person boarding house where it just, I feel for people that live in boarding houses, and that's what they can afford to live in. That's generally a cheaper place to live. I just don't know if I just can't bring myself to approve one here. So, any other questions or comments? With that, I assume you're ready to vote. Mr. Nalazri.
So this is for staff. I mean, is there any residential use at all in employment?
No, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a pretty big ask.
Just wanted.
Yeah.
In the old days, I have to give a history lesson when the opportunity avails itself. In the olden days, our zoning code was designed cumulatively. So the single-family zoning district only allowed single-family. The multifamily district allowed single-family and multifamily. The commercial, those two, and commercial. And the industrial district was just a grab bag. Everything was permitted. What that did, though, was create what we would call today, maybe not then, a social justice issue, where you had the working poor not being served by the zoning code. They were living right next door to nuisances, which was the whole purpose of the zoning ordinances to begin with. They're based on nuisance law. So probably, if I had to guess, the 1956 zoning code was a pretty big feat. And I think that's probably when we kind of got away from the cumulative nature of our industrial zoning district.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And he kept it to under a minute. Who would have thought? All right, unless there's any other questions, I assume you're ready to vote. All right, if you'll give us a roll call, Mr. Whitehead.
Mr. Jackson?
No.
Mr. Malazri?
No.
Ms. Doss?
No.
Ms. Baker?
No.
Vice Chair Savage-Jones?
No, I find that the standards of the UDC of 9.22.6 are not being met, and that this property will be duly detrimental to the properties in the vicinity.
Ms. Scarlock,
No.
Mr. Claybrook,
No.
and Mr. Chairman.
No.
That's 8 nays.
And the motion failed. Thank you all for joining us today. Mr. Whitehead, is there any, or do we have any announcements now?
Yes, sir.
All right, with that, we are adjourned.